This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Dave has taken the words straight out of my mouth this morning. We were clearly listening to the same news bulletin. Mel Stride, he writes, is a ridiculous individual, criticising Labour for not having a plan before they came into office, while his ludicrous party had no plan while in office for 14 disastrous years. Can we see if Dave's free to do my holiday cover next time I'm allowed a holiday? Although I believe a petition was started yesterday to prevent me from ever taking a holiday again. I certainly won't be signing that. Two things spring to mind this morning. One from the news and one from real life, which oddly is an illustration or emblematic of the tension that I'm going to describe to you shortly. The first is comments from Tanni Gray-Thompson in the newspaper this morning, in one newspaper this morning, about her profound misgivings at what was announced yesterday in regards to benefit cuts that will affect disabled people. And B, her description of the demonisation of disabled people that she is already aware of. She writes, or she said yesterday, there is some really horrible rhetoric around at the moment. It's not a great time for disabled people. And the worry is that this doesn't do the right things to get people into work. She described how she had been contacted by disabled people saying that they had been shouted at in the street by passers-by, telling them that they're, quotes, going to get their benefits cut, end quotes. I remember a phone-in from years ago. Do you? About the badges in cars. Now there is a ferocious illegal trade in disabled badges. Our local neighbourhood group regularly reports the theft of them from parked cars, and you know it can, I think, save you a fortune in parking. And that was the way into the conversation, but it was one of those conversations that we have together that went off in entirely unexpected directions, because it turned into a conversation about the way in which some people see those badges as an invitation to abuse you. So you park in the disabled bay at the supermarket, for example, and you are not immediately and obviously disabled. So you don't get out of the car on crutches in order to get your wheelchair out of the back of the boot, or you do not immediately appear to be. You might only be able to walk 100 yards. You might only be able to walk 30 yards. But that person seeing you get out of the car can't immediately see that you've only got one arm, or that you are obviously and visibly prevented from leading an abled life. And so they abuse you. I get taken by surprise by you regularly on this programme, but I think that is remembered as one of the times when I couldn't quite believe my ears. I couldn't quite believe what you were telling me. I did believe it, but I couldn't quite believe it, if you see what I mean. And so that, and who would doubt Tanni Gray-Thompson's testimony in this field? That's the first thing that resonated with me this morning. The second thing that resonated with me this morning was a conversation with a friend who is paraplegic, who doesn't have the use of his legs. And I asked him whether or not he had got across the changes that have been made to disability benefits, of which he avails himself. He also works full-time. And he said, no, mate, I haven't got a clue. I mean, at the time of his accident, the hospital wrote the words "for life" on a piece of paperwork somewhere, because his condition is not one for which a cure exists. I don't know whether he doesn't know whether that has insulated him in some way from the tests that are in place for other people in receipt of similar benefits. But he doesn't really get it. And the reason I wanted to canvass his opinion was because I don't know who we should be listening to today. Apart from the absolute certainty that we shouldn't be listening to Mel Stride. I can say that with full confidence. Because whenever I've done this conversation in the past, I have struggled to find the points between the cynical anecdotalist and the sincere sufferer. So I will take calls from people who absolutely deserve their disability benefit, may not immediately present the reasons why on your first encounter with them. This is going to be particularly true, isn't it, of mental health, and who are living diminished lives and worry that their lives will be further diminished by any cuts to welfare. And I can also take calls, although I suspect I have been a little bit discouraging of them over the years. Goodness knows they are red carpets galore are rolled out for them on other radio programs. But I have also taken calls from people who know someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone who is clearly taking the mickey. Whether it is regard to a mobility vehicle, where there's a piece in the Times, I think, today pointing out some flaws in that system. But I have a family member who used to work for Motability, and as with all systems, I suppose there are flaws. Some of these do seem to be in need of remedy, but it's never going to be a reason to chuck the proverbial baby out with the bathwater. So how do we know, especially when our newspapers today and our commentators today are divided between saying it's gone too far and it hasn't gone far enough? It's a strange one. I shall show you what I mean. More than 1 million disabled people at risk of big benefit cut. This is according to experts, including the Resolution Foundation. And yet, if I turn to another paper, I learn that Andrew Neil thinks that Labour has blown a once-in-a-generation chance to slash Britain's bloated welfare bill. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would anybody ever listen to anything Andrew Neil has to say? Or indeed any other Brexit-supporting Donald Trump fan? You'd think they might have learned their lesson by now, but that's not how the British media works, is it? Being wrong about everything for pretty much your entire career is absolutely no obstacle whatsoever to continuing to opine on the front page of national newspapers on subjects about which you are just as qualified to comment as you were about Brexit and Donald Trump. So how do you know who to listen to? How do you know who to listen to? Where do you go for your information? Worried sick on the front page of the Mirror. This is one of those days where the British newspapers actually do serve a useful purpose. Unfortunately, the purpose they serve that is useful is to almost enforce and confirm the confusion that honest people will be feeling at how the stories have unfolded. This is nice from James. You don't look disabled to me, they say, to which the classic answer is, and you didn't look stupid to me. Daily Mirror goes, worried sick. Fear and uncertainty for the vulnerable. I think this is probably closest to where I am this morning. Fear and uncertainty for the vulnerable. But number 10 defends sweeping changes. They have been branded cruel, and yet, of course, they've also been accused of excessive caution and retaining too, quotes, generous a system. And Keir Starmer writes for Rupert Murdoch's Times today about how benefits, what he describes as a benefits trap, has reaped a terrible cost. And if you were to take him on trust, you would understand that the cost of sickness and disability benefit rising from 65 to 100 billion pounds by the end of the decade is something, he says, cannot be sustained, cannot be afforded. He also claims that young people are shut out of the labour market at a formative age, written off by a single assessment, people who want to return to work yet can't access the support they need. All this is happening at scale, and it is indefensible. He describes it as an affront to the values of our country and Labour's history. So who do you trust on a day like today? And the answer might be that we don't know yet, because the full number crunching has not been completed, not just by my friend, who doesn't know yet whether or not they are going to be affected by it, but also by everybody else who is usually charged with crunching the numbers. The Times has a go at it, and I think do a fairly decent job of breaking it down, reducing inactivity incentives. So job seekers can currently double their income by being deemed unfit for any work, which kind of does lend itself to an idea that some people who are fit for some work have little incentive to pursue it even if they wanted to, because they'll end up worse off. Young people face a ban on claiming incapacity benefits entirely, as they're not going to be left penniless, but they won't get any extra money as a consequence of an incapacity. This is for people aged 18 to 22. Instead, they'll receive a guarantee of a training or employment offer, and they'll lose benefits if they turn it down. That will affect about 66,000 people. And there are other areas as well. The protection of the vulnerable that Liz Kendall outlined yesterday would involve guarantees, if you like, for the most severely disabled. If you have no chance of improving, then you may never be reassessed again to guarantee your universal credit payments, and you will have fewer PIPS assessments. So if your condition is permanent, if it is incurable, irreversible, then your life, I think, is poised to improve. And that, I think, also walks the line that we've discussed a lot on the programme recently between can't and won't. If you really are a can't, if there's no question, probably need to slightly rephrase that. If you really are a cannot, then you will no longer have to prove it on a regular-ish basis and jump through, or not metaphorical hoops, in order to secure what financial support you receive from the state. Whereas if you are a won't, or I think a will not, perhaps moving forward, if you are a will not, then you are going to be helped, stroke encouraged, stroke compelled to move back into the workspace. So I don't get the calls from the middle ground. Generally, I've had a few, so you will hear from people who, for example, are in that category of wanting to go to work but being able only to do X hours a week, and therefore not wanting to do that because you would lose the benefit that essentially doubles your income. You wouldn't make enough, or you wouldn't make, to do 20 hours a week for £100 more than you would receive not doing any work, or £50 more. It means that you're working for £2.50 an hour, or for £5 an hour. You're doing work that has been adjudged by the system, by the government, to be a pittance, to be illegal in terms of sums. But when you crunch all these numbers together, that's where it goes. 10.15 is the time. And I've also taken calls from people over the years who have told me that they have sort of got trapped in these sort of circles, but not many. Not many. I think you can see where we're going with this, can't you? Yes. Question one, broad question. How do we know? 0345 6060 973, whether or not this is cruel or inadequate. How do we know if it's gone too far or not? It's Goldilocks territory, right? Is it mummy bear, daddy bear, or baby bear? Is it too hot, too cold, or just right? How do we know? That's your first question. And I'll take any answer you've got to that, because it's a tricky one, isn't it? 0345 6060 973. How do we know? 1.2 million people could be affected. If you are one of them, tell me how that makes you feel today. But how do we know? And then the second question becomes, how feasible is it? Because I've never bought this, I've got to be honest with you. And the only reason I'm entertaining the possibility today is because it's a Labour government that's introduced these policies, not a Tory government. And I know there'll be plenty of people listening to this programme who are beginning to wonder what the difference is. I think you're silly to think that, but in a loving way. I think the list of things that distinguish this government from what we've seen over the last 14 years is as long as your arm. But I also do understand why any talk at all of cutting welfare, particularly for disabled people, feels like a place that your Labour Party should never go to. Again, you're wrong, because it's very much a part of the last Labour government as well. But as in Tony Blair's and Gordon Brown's, but I know it doesn't feel like the party of Aneurin Bevan, perhaps, or even Clement Attlee. And that's the second question: is that how do you inhabit this story? How is it something that you can understand, that you can actually see some wisdom in? Because of the system that you have been in, and how many degrees of separation should we have here? I don't know. I think the worst one I ever heard was the woman who rang me to dob in her sister-in-law. Or was it even her sister, actually? I mean, how does the system work? How feasible is it? How much flab is there to be trimmed? How much, not fraud, I don't think. Maybe that's a good and helpful distinction. Because fraud is obviously wrong and it's illegal. So if someone's doing that, it doesn't prove that the system is wrong any more than someone committing a murder proves that our laws regarding murder are wrong. If someone is committing benefits fraud in this context, but if someone isn't and they are being prevented from work or discouraged from work, then that's what I want to hear about. Let's try anyway. I'll cast my net. I've described the two poles, the angry and often cynical anecdotalist describing somebody else's life. And remember, if you're describing an actual crime, it's not quite the zinger that you think it is, because no one's going to defend that. No one's going to defend someone who is actually gaming or defrauding the system. And then you've got the sincere sufferer. I hope that phrase is one that we're all comfortable with. The person who really does need help from the state in order to function, regardless of whether or not that function involves work or not. But in the context of these cuts, it's going to be the people who we have been filing now for a while under cannot or can't, not won't. And Starmer's entire premise is built on the idea that some of the people who look like won'ts actually could be cans. Shall we just throw open the phone lines now? You clear on what I'm looking? I hope you are. Sorry, I sound like a teacher there. I do apologise. It's 1019, the number you need, as ever, 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10 is the time. I've got a very, very early entry for Idiot's Corner, but we should probably crack on with the calls first. A couple of texts just to set the scene. Cam reminds us that years ago the government would actively encourage people to go on the sick in order to keep the unemployment figures down. I think that refers particularly to former coal mining and steel working areas that where many people had little prospect of returning to work after their factories and mines had been shut down. Alan speaks for many of you when he says, I'm fully to the left, always have been, desperate for a Labour government, concerned about some of the steps the current government have taken. I'm just hoping Keir Starmer will be able to get his cigar out in a few years' time and say, I love it when a plan comes together. I'm in a pretty similar position to Alan, but I appreciate that I'm not in the firing line of the plan. And I like this from Dylan. I might be naive on this, James, but I find that when one side says it's not enough, and the other side says it's too much, then it's probably about right. I'm taking that. I don't know if anyone else has ever done it before. I'm almost certain that they have, but I'm calling that the Goldilocks paradigm. Too hot, too cold, or just right. And if someone is saying it's too hot and someone else is saying it's too cold, the chances are it's actually just right for you. I don't know. Claire's in Carnarvon. Claire, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I just wanted to talk really about the 4-point system that is being proposed now in the daily living element of PIP payments. So you have to have 4 points in one of those categories. At the moment, I've got 13, so I qualify for the full amount, but I don't have 4 in one category, so I will lose everything.
How many categories are there?
I think it's 8, altogether.
Right.
But it's broken up into different sections like bathing and dressing and eating and preparing food and that sort of thing. So in one of those, you would have to have 4 points together. And it's impossibly hard to even get it. I have to appeal it every time.
So the Times dug into this, didn't they? The Times newspaper. People would be required to score at least 4 points on at least one assessment of their difficulties with daily living.
Yeah.
So you don't reach 4 points on any of them?
No.
Okay. And that will leave some people like you, I fear, struggling with washing, dressing and eating.
It will affect. 100%.
But you don't lose everything, because if you've got a total of 8 points or higher, you still qualify for the lower rate of payment. And if you've got 12 points, you qualify for the higher rate. How many points did you say you had?
Well, I've got 13 in total, but if the new recommendations come in, if you don't have a section...
If you don't get up to 4 on one of them, then it doesn't matter what your overall total is.
No, it could be 18, 20, it doesn't matter. You'll get nothing.
Do you understand why?
I kind of do, but... Can
you explain it to me, if it's not too tricky? And I think it's 10 categories for daily living and 2 for mobility, just for the... Just for the record. Do you understand why this has happened? What it's designed to do, or why you? Because wherever you put a threshold, Claire, as we've discussed many times on this programme, someone's going to be just above it and someone's going to be just under it, and it's going to feel desperately unfair to the person just under it. But I don't understand what the threshold is. Do you understand why it's there?
I understand it from an outside perspective in that they're desperate to save money, and it's people who have never had to apply for PIP, because trust me, you wouldn't if you didn't need to.
So there's about 1 million people potentially in your position.
Yeah.
The Resolution Foundation estimates between 800,000 and 1.2 million people losing between £4,200 and £6,300 a year.
Yeah, it will be the upper end of that, because you lose the PIP, but you also lose council tax benefit. I get half price on my car tax.
Right. And how is this going to affect your life? I mean, if Liz Kendall was here, she'd explain that PIP claims have doubled to more than 1,000 a day. They're increasing twice as fast as the underlying rate of disability. Claims are up 150% of young people, 190% for mental health conditions. But none of that is going to keep you warm in winter or put petrol in your car. So how do you think this is going to impact on you? Sorry. That's all right.
After rent, I'll be living on about £480 for everything.
Per month?
Yeah.
What are you living on at the moment?
A bit more than that.
Yeah, do you know how much?
I don't offhand. I mean, it's not huge. I mean, I don't go out. I'm 90% housebound now.
Right. So you're worried. I think someone wants feeding, don't they? Or at least letting out into the garden. But there it is. Thank you. That was the I mean, I wish you weren't in this situation, but that exact cohort of people who are not going to hit 4 points on the PIP eligibility, but who will break through all of the upper barriers on what you need for the higher rate even, but not actually scoring 4 points on at least one of the 12 assessments, the 10 daily living assessments, and that is where the money's going to come from. We'll dig further into that, Claire, with other people as well, but I mean, I'm going to find it hard to justify that, aren't you? To say to Claire that's it, you're just going to have to suck it up and live with it, particularly if you're a Labour supporter by inclination or tradition. 0345 60973 is the number you need to grab the phone line that's just been vacated. Verity's in Taunton. Verity, what would you like to say?
I won't survive without PIP. It will be the death knell for me, and that's not hyperbole. Okay. I have a congenital disease. I was born disabled. I've spent my life pretending to be able-bodied because I grew up with a disabled father during Thatcher's era. This government, with the figures that I've been looking at, are asking people to subsist on £50 a week on universal credit. That is only a few quid more than it was in 1990 during the poll tax riots. There was a placard, I exist on £47 a week, I can't pay poll tax. 35 years on, and we're expected to live in the 2025 economy on £50 a week, and then I'm not going to get PIP with the new criteria. Because
you don't score 4 points in.
No, I'm not going to qualify
in any of the. Can you explain that to us? Do you think? I mean, what does that mean?
I don't know if you're aware of PIP, but it's War and Peace. It's 40 pages long.
No, I understand that. I don't want to sound. I'm just conscious of the time. So for people listening who don't know what, because they will say, if you're not scoring 4 points in at least one of the 10 areas of assessment, then you're not disabled enough. That to break it down into really unpleasant and ugly language, that is what it looks like from the outside. What does it mean? What does it mean from the inside?
From a pure medical perspective, it's such a lie. All that is moving the goalpost. It's not saying you're not disabled enough. We just don't want to pay you for your level of disability. We don't want to help you through life because this is not an out-of-work benefit. This is helping people that are disabled, who are in work, stay in work. So
but if you're in work, you're not. I'm
not in work. I wish I could be, and I have tried.
So can we talk about you? So when you fail to get these 4 points, what does that mean? What is the category in which you get 3, or do you see what I mean? Because I know how complicated it is, and that makes this question a complicated question by definition. But for people who know nothing about this world, or your life, what is it that you do not suffer from that would push you into the next, in any of those 10 categories, that would qualify you for the payment?
So as of last year, I had home assistance. And that person was running the bath for me, preparing my meals, cutting food for me because I can't safely cut food myself. They were doing all manner of tasks for me in order for me to do the things that I could still do, which is very limited. I've got quite limited mobility. I've got Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So that affects all my organs and all my joints. Right now I've got finger splints on because my index fingers keep wanting to dislocate. So
this is what I'm confused. This is what I mean. You're confident that you're not going to qualify under the key protections for the most severely disabled.
Because of the language that's being used, there's minor adjustments as to. So for example, I have a person who can help me make a meal. Yeah. But for example, I could use a microwave.
Yes.
I don't have a microwave, but say I had a microwave and I could use. So she prepared the meal for me, and then I come to have a meal. And I can put it in a microwave that instantaneously precludes me from a point.
So that's one of the questions they would ask, is this person capable of operating a microwave? If they are, they don't need help heating food.
And yet that's not strictly true, because there are days I won't be able to do that, because my condition is called dynamic.
Right.
I have a dynamic disability where...
Does that mean it goes up and down?
Yeah. I mean, and it's extreme. I mean, like last year, for example, I stubbed my toe. And I dislocated it. So, and that normal person just stubs their toe and they walk about the rest of their life. I was off my foot for 6 weeks.
And the PIP is only going to be on the day that you answer the question?
Yeah.
So if you were post-stubbing, your answer to some questions would be very different to your answers pre-stubbing.
Yeah.
And that is something that the system doesn't recognise at all.
And the fact is, this condition is I'm going to get more ill. As once I hit 40, you're going to see an increase in health events with this condition, and I have. I was in hospital in 2022 as an emergency. I mean, even a couple of weeks ago, I have an open complaint with the DWP. They called a welfare check on me because I was suicidal.
And I'm so sorry to hear that, I obviously. And the idea that more could be done to help you into work,
There's no, do you know what?
Go on.
I will say this. I've worked all my life. I didn't even wait to leave school. I was 14 when I started working, and I only stopped working after the DWP declared me unfit for work in 2008. Even though they did that, I was still trying to go back to work, and I was told by my employer that I couldn't go back and they had to terminate my contract. And I spent the next 10 years trying to find a way off the benefits so I could work. And there was 1 year, 2019, I spent some time trying to create some content for online, and I spent 5 hours doing it, and I spent 3 months recovering. And I was in a deep, dark depression after that, because I realised I had to accept I'm never going to work again, and that was so destroying for me.
Of course it was.
Nobody wants to be on benefits. This is not an indulgence. It's not a choice. No one would choose, no rational person chooses this unless they have no choice.
And even people who have no choice are going to end up considerably worse off than they are currently. PIP should reflect your worst day, one texter says. It even says so in the paperwork. And progressive illnesses are not going to be reassessed. Verity, all I can do is hope that things are not quite as bad as you think they are going to be, but that is scant consolation to you and people in your situation. Ted puts it well. He writes, I'm probably too disabled to be affected by this, but the debate has always been ridiculous. The amount of people that cheat is tiny. This is just Starmer's cynical attempt to keep the right-wing press happy and thus potentially harm disabled people's lives. Well, he hasn't kept the right-wing press happy. Your point stands, Ted, but the right-wing press will all be arguing that it hasn't gone far enough. And if there was a left-wing press, it would be arguing, with the support of people like Verity's story, that it has already gone too far. So who is it aimed at? Who are the people that are going to be in the target zone, but, quotes, I know this is a horrible word, deserve, end quotes, to be? Here's Thomas Watts with some rather late headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:38. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Mick speaks for many people contacting me today when he writes from the outside of this story. Most of our calls, if not all, will be from the inside, of course. Mick writes, "This is breaking my heart, James. I see the necessity of these cuts, but to hear individual cases makes it personal, just like the pensioners who missed out on the winter fuel allowance. I just don't know if this is the right thing to do." Well, Liz Kendall, Keir Starmer are supremely confident that it is. The former deploying a barrage of statistics in the House of Commons yesterday, which you heard the speech on this programme. Well, you may not have done, but we played it anyway. We took it live. And she explained that it, quote, snares millions of people in a cycle of unemployment and inactivity, failing the very people it's meant to be there for, as well as the taxpayers who foot the bill. It doesn't work. I can't do it. I explained to you at the outset this morning that I'm interested in speaking to people who recognise what she's describing, but it sounds like an invitation to tell me about how awful this is going to be for you, and that's fine. This is time that we share together every day, and I'm not going to start laying down the law about what can and can't be contributed, but it's possible that two things can be true at the same time. That it goes both too far and not far enough, depending on which individual case you are looking at. How many people among the 4 million, over 4 million, currently claiming sickness benefits could work with the right help? How many of the million young people, 1 in 8 young people currently not in education, employment or training, and in receipt of a sickness benefit, how many of them could work with the right help? How many of them are not working? Because to do some work would involve cessation of the support, the financial support they currently receive, which would actually mean that you're better off not working, or you're not sufficiently better off working to justify working. 20 to 11 is the time. B's in Bedford. B, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello, B.
It's lovely to speak to you today.
Likewise. What a lovely day it is. Very appropriate for your name
indeed.
Today, B.
Yes, thank you. It's actually much more of a complex issue than
Yes.
a lot of journalists would like to make.
Yes.
So, yes, there are some issues with PIP. If I can just touch on that first.
Take all the time you want. You work in the sector, I think.
I do indeed,
Right.
yeah. I've been a welfare advisor for 25 years.
Perfect. Fill your boots.
Lovely. So one of the areas that hasn't actually been discussed yet is if you remove personal independence payments, daily living allowance for disabled people, the knock-on effect is on carers. You cannot get carers allowance without the person you care for getting that benefit. So on top of the disabled person losing the money that they use to buy services, they then possibly also lose their family or friend carer who then has to say, sorry, need to go to work because I've lost my money. So there's that effect that nobody's talked about as well.
Yeah.
And yes, the 4-point thing, just to clarify, whether you need an aid or whether you need the help of a person, you only get 2 points. There's very specific criteria for getting the 4 points, and it is a very high bar. So they're absolutely right. It is going to affect I think the Resolution Foundation is probably about spot on. It's probably closer to the 1 million mark than the 800,000 mark.
And by effect, what do we really mean?
Losing their daily living allowance.
And that means
losing their carers possibly as well.
So people are going to be terrified this morning.
Effect.
People are going to be really frightened.
Yeah, I mean, and Mel Stride was so disingenuous when he said silly things like...
Not Mel Stride.
No, yeah. But, the idea that disabled people should, if you need an aid, NHS gives you the aid and then off you go. Aids have a shelf life of a year if you're lucky because of the stresses that are put on them. So they need to be replenished and upgraded. Plus, is that really right to say to a disabled person, this is the type of aid you have to use because that's what's provided by the NHS? You can't go off and find the one that's suitable for your height, for your weight, for your body shape. That's just sort of, it's making disabled people into children. It's a horrible way of looking at things.
And yet, working within the system, you probably recognise that some improvements are required.
Absolutely. And
so what would you do if I put you in charge and charged you with saving money? Or does it automatically become morally indefensible once we actually start trying to save money, because we should simply be spending more on looking after society's more vulnerable people?
There is an argument that if you fix the fundamentals, then this will naturally come down. So there are a few things here. One is children who have disabilities in schools are not getting the SEND support they need, which means that they come out as adults without the right skills to be able to transition into adult life, working life, and so on. So that's one area. Then you've got a broken health and social care system, which means that there are people languishing, waiting for support from health and social care that would then help them transition into perhaps working a little, a lot, or maybe not at all. But they could also be doing volunteering work. Do you remember the big society that David Cameron had?
Wash your mouth out, B. Wash your mouth out.
But you couldn't build that without the support structures in place. Right. And that's my argument. You cannot do this without that. You need to do them hand in hand, and it will naturally bring down the number of people that need to claim this support.
So is there any wait and see element to what you're telling me? Is there any...
A little bit. So... for example, when they got rid of tax credits and changed into universal credit, one massive flaw that we were screaming from the rooftops is you've not got a disabled element in there, which means that disabled workers don't have that additional support that they need to get in and stay and work. For example, if you were a disabled worker, you could probably work maybe 20 hours a week, but beyond that, it's going to completely wipe you out. You couldn't do it. So tax credits could top you up, which means that you could live a dignified life.
Right.
Universal credit is binary. You're either sick or you're not.
Yeah.
Which means that you have to say, I'm too sick to work, to then be able to get the support to go and work.
This is what we were touching on, and the OBR and the IFS have said that this is a likely factor driving people onto incapacity benefits.
Yes, and the other problem is that we actually have disability employment advisors in every job centre, and they are fantastic. Unfortunately, nobody gets referred to them.
Why not?
Because at the front line, the job coaches are overwhelmed with cases. They haven't got the time to sift through. Yes, they need to spend more time with every individual to work out what is right for them. And there are lots of people with the support of disability employment advisors, they can then go on to work. And that is including the people that are in the too sick to work category. That's the point here. You don't have to not be too sick to work to be able to work as well.
I think a few people would quite like you to be in charge, as opposed to perhaps Liz Kendall. I don't know if she's up for a job swap. I've got one quick question. I'm all over the place on my junctions today, and I have to be conscious of Keith's mental equilibrium as well as my physical safety. So I mean, what's the worst? When will we know if things are really bad? If things have gone really wrong?
Let's wait for the green paper, because, of course, there's going to be consultations. Yep. In the consultations, all of the disability charities and the think tanks and so on will put their input. And I suspect, much like the ridiculous paper that the Tories brought out last year, some of this will be watered down over time.
The art of the deal, B.
Indeed.
The art of the deal. 10:46, and there it is. So it's an opening, if you like, to a negotiation, a bit like the RMT's ridiculous request this morning that tube drivers go to the front of the council house queue, which literally nobody sensible could possibly take seriously. But it is, of course, a negotiating point which they can then step back from in return for other concessions, because that is how it works. And do you know who didn't write the book, The Art of the Deal, by Donald Trump? I'll tell you after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 minutes to 11. You know I have a ongoing commitment to trying to keep you up to speed with how quickly the world is, in Simon Marx's words from yesterday, that democracy is dying in the United States. But remember that that's a rock in a pool, and the ripples of that rock will be spreading all over the world. I can tell you that the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, a key challenger to President Erdogan, has just been detained by Turkish police. So literally locking up political rivals now in Erdogan's Turkey, Erdogan on that list of authoritarian and increasingly anti-democratic leaders that Vladimir Putin sits at the top of, and Donald Trump aspires to joining. I've got 2 stories for you later today, which I think we're going to file. It needs a pithy name, but it's too serious for a pithy sting or a pithy jingle. The things that are absolutely awful, but you probably haven't heard of because so much awful stuff is going on. And as Simon explained yesterday, that's the point. You do so much awful stuff that the ability to resist is almost dismantled. Even, I worry, the ability to report. But 2 stories for you today from the United States that are hideous. Actually, is the word I would use. And yet we've got our own potentially hideous story here with regard to the cuts to disabled benefits, the saving of £5 billion, chiefly by removing anybody who doesn't score 4 points on at least one of the 10 PIP assessments from the PIP payment. And we've already heard that is considerably harder to swallow in real life than it is in a parliamentary speech. Judith is in Harpenden. Judith, what would you like to say?
Right, where to begin?
Wherever you want. Take
I'm
your time.
going to talk to you from a lived experience.
Yes.
A parent carer, retired paediatric nurse, husband a retired surgeon for the NHS.
Oh, wow.
The labour is in my genes. I've voted for them all my life. I march with the miners.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
We have a disabled son, autistic and learning disabilities. He's fit and strong. He does well. We didn't make this choice.
Yeah.
He didn't make this choice. And yes, his life is reduced to a point system. He makes a valuable contribution to society by going to a non-for-profit charity who are funded from his benefits. I wish, and I would love to, have a roundtable discussion with Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, and for them to visit me in my home and spend at least one day shadowing my son and seeing what these young people actually contribute to society, because I am sick to death of the demonisation of disabled people.
What would they learn? I mean, Keir Starmer would immediately say that he lived with his disabled mother and understands some of the issues that you face. But
He doesn't.
What would they learn? Go on.
Because my son benefits mean that he can go to work placements.
Yes.
It means he can contribute to society, sell food on the market from the non-profit society. These kids, the ones that serve you in the charity shops.
So this would be
next to on the bus.
This would be a dispensation for people in receipt of disability benefits who are volunteering.
He pays for it out of his benefits. And he's also in supported living. So the whole component of he's not on PIP, he's on Ulster DLA, goes to pay for his care to the local authority. Without that, he could become homeless.
And what do you understand is going to happen to him and you as a consequence of what was announced yesterday?
We're waiting to go over to PIP because we're on All Stars ELA, so I have no idea.
Right.
Because I can't explain to him on a point system, on how it affects my son on a daily basis, hourly basis. If you could find an employer that could work with a learning disabled person that can't do maths and can't get access to employment because he hasn't got a maths qualification, so be it. I've tried. God help us, we have tried.
And that's a guillotine, is it? If you haven't got the GCSE in maths, then you can't get any...
Well, you can't even get it through entry level. I mean, it's, so... And I was told when I tried an employment route for my son, don't bother, keep him on benefits. And that was only 2 years ago.
And that brings us back to the other side of the coin, doesn't it? Is the idea, and I appreciate that at the moment you're not exactly going to be overwhelmed with confidence in this idea, that more can be done to help your son find work that he's clearly capable of doing, but he's
not suffering. He doesn't need help. He needs people to understand he's fit and strong. He can work.
That's what I'm saying.
If somebody would just listen individually to him. If we have people in job centres says, I know James. I said his name now.
That's right. Pretend it's me.
Okay. I know I know this young man. I know he's got a care and support plan. I know he can do, But no, it's alienating. When I went to the job centre with my son to fill out a form, we wept.
How naive do I sound when I say there is... Don't laugh at me yet, please, Judith. Let me get to the end.
I'm laughing at myself. It's
Let me get to the end of the question. When I say that if you take them at their word, this is the sort of trap that they are keen to help people out of, a cycle of unemployment and inactivity. I know he's not inactive, but and we're going to take unemployment to mean paid. That in fact your son is one of the people who should be helped into paid employment.
Except if he goes into paid employment, he loses all his disability status. You get an employer then who says, I can't work with this young man, he's slow at the job. I've got someone else who can do it 4 times as quick in the shorter space of time. Who are they going to employ? So then he loses all his benefits. He'd be destitute. He'd be living back with us.
And the 2 key protections for the most severely disabled, you don't think are going to involve him?
The protections as in, so I don't understand.
Well, this is the thing that I mean, the nearest thing to optimism I can take away from this conversation is the line that B made about waiting for the green paper, accepting that this is now open to consultation, and the bit that Liz Kendall said yesterday about people who have conditions that involve no chance of improving may never be reassessed to guarantee their universal credit payments, and will also be subject to fewer PIPS assessment. So I'm
sorry, it's not going to. It doesn't stack up. My son's disability is lifelong. Yeah, we've been through assessments. It's lifelong. It's not going to change.
But that's what she's describing. That's what she's describing.
Yeah, but he still will be reassessed. And on the point system, it's not going to stack up.
Okay.
Because he can dress himself.
Yes.
He's not incontinent.
There's even a distinction between, I'm told, being able to dress yourself above the waist and being able to dress yourself below the waist.
It's bonk. Anyway, I'm so sorry. I do have to go. I've got an appointment. So
that's quite all right.
I'm glad I've got through.
So am I. I hope you feel you've said at least most of what you were hoping to say.
Well, if you can take it to somebody, I would.
Well, I will keep your details, certainly. I mean, it's time we got one of them on the show, actually. It's everybody else. It's not my favourite style of broadcasting, to be honest with you, having politicians in the studio, but I suppose sometimes we have to, and if we do, then Judith will be at the very least on the phones to them, and ideally in the room. It is coming up to 10:59. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I know there's a lot of people still waiting to talk. Paula, Jonathan, David, Janie, Tim, Lisa, Sam, Alex, and I can say with some confidence that my colleagues will be returning to this subject in the course of today, and that you will have every opportunity to be heard when they do so. But I just want to give you a quick heads up on the 2... I didn't tell you who didn't write The Art of the Deal, did I, by Donald Trump? Any guesses at the back? Yeah, Donald Trump. In fact, the bloke who did write it, a ghostwriter called Tony Schwartz, reveals he doesn't think Donald Trump's even read it. He never reads books. The entire mythology of Donald Trump is bogus, is fake. But there's nothing fake about these 2 stories that have come out of the United States of America today. The Pentagon has removed a web page from official records commemorating one of the flag raisers at Iwo Jima, essentially because he was a member of an ethnic minority, and a law that bans segregation has been quietly undone. Segregated facilities, as in waiting room for, and I'm using the language of the time, coloureds only, was illegal until Donald Trump became president.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Has it ever felt like this before? I mean, I've talked about the unique moments we've spent together. I think most obviously the pandemic. Becoming the first population in history to actually vote to impose economic sanctions on ourselves and to abolish our own freedom of movement was a moment, wasn't it? But I don't think it ever felt like we were going to be overwhelmed or drown in the events that were unfolding. I mean, everywhere you look at the moment, it feels as if epochal things are happening. Putin and Trump trust each other, the Kremlin has just said, which probably makes Donald Trump the only person on the planet that trusts Vladimir Putin, who is almost certainly lying about trusting Donald Trump, unless, of course, that old possibility that he's got something on the Mango Mussolini turns out to be true. And you've got Zelensky at the moment trying to sort of navigate his way through a world of lies. He's already essentially had to point out that Donald Trump doesn't exactly have a healthy relationship with the truth, and now he's describing Vladimir Putin as simply saying things that are not true. And then the two stories I just touched upon before the news, it occurred to me when I finished them that I should spend longer on this stuff, because who else is going to? I don't mean that in a self-aggrandizing way. I just mean that who else in your life is going to be able to, because it's not their job. It's not, So the first story involves not just one Pima Indian, a Native American, one of the 6 Marines photographed hoisting the US flag on Iwo Jima in 1945. Described as an emblem of the contributions and sacrifices Native Americans have made to the United States, not just in the military, but in all walks of life. PFC Ira Hayes was their name, and that's been removed from the Defense Department's website. So have many others about Native American and other minority service members. Just removed. They've been erased as part of the Trump's administration cracking down on what they say are diversity, equity and inclusion efforts. So what they appear to mean by diversity, equity and inclusion efforts is simply acknowledging the contribution to American life of people who are not white men. I want you just to take a moment, okay, regardless of your politics, even if you're still pretending to celebrate this stuff. Even if you're still, maybe you're not even pretending, maybe you're beyond help. But just take a moment to think about that. That they are literally seeking to remove from history contributors to American life, soldiers who were prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice, soldiers who did. These guys are code breakers, Navajo code talkers, critical to America's victory at Iwo Jima and in the wider Pacific theatre of the Second World War. They've removed a profile of a Tonawanda Seneca officer who drafted the terms of the Confederacy's surrender at Appomattox towards the end of the Civil War. They're literally just removing people, if they're not white men, from the official government history. This is what I mean when I say I sometimes feel we haven't got the words, I haven't got the vocabulary to describe what is going on. And the other story that actually happened a while ago, but National Public Radio in the United States just picked up on it this week. It was the case until late last year, I think, that just a few weeks ago, the federal government in the United States explicitly prohibited all contractors from having segregated restaurants, waiting rooms and drinking fountains. So there is enshrined in regulation the unacceptability, the illegality, the prohibition, to use a word Americans like, the prohibition of segregation. So, those signs that we usually, you associate them both with sort of the Woolworths milk counter in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C., the story of Rosa Parks. Racial segregation. You may think also of apartheid era South Africa. It has been prohibited for contractors to have segregated restaurants. Well, it isn't anymore. Public memo issued by the General Services Administration last month, affecting all civil federal agencies. Making changes, they say, are prompted by President Trump's executive order on diversity, equity and inclusion, repeals an executive order signed by Lyndon B. Johnson in 1965 that required any contractor on federal business to avoid segregation. So, whether on what do you think now? What do you think? Oh, don't worry, they're not going to bring that back. And then I tell you the other story. You need to see these two stories in concert with each other. So you say, don't worry, they're not going to bring back coloureds only signs in government buildings or segregated restaurants and canteens in government buildings. And I go, no, you must be right. Of course they're not. Then A, why did they do it? And B, why are they removing Native American soldiers from official military history? Why are they removing web pages about women from actual military history? LGBTQ plus service members, people who are being commemorated for their service, are being removed because of their identity. It means, of course, that history itself is being compromised, is being rewritten, which I'm afraid is another example of George Orwell not being an exaggerated person to cite at this point. It is happening, and it's happening in real time, and it's happening on our watch, and I don't know what anyone can do about it except, in my own small way, making sure that you know. It's coming up to 11:10. We stay in Britain for the next story. I saw another play last night by the same bloke that wrote the last play I was raving about, James Graham, who wrote Punch, that's on at the New Vic, about the young man who killed another young man with a single punch and has gone on to work in the field of restorative justice, up to and including with his victim's mother. An extraordinary young man. I had the pleasure of meeting him. So did you, Jacob Dunn. He was here a couple of weeks ago. But James Graham's written another play about Gareth Southgate, would you believe, called Dear England, and he has updated it now because the original version of the play kind of finished on an upbeat note, as if we were about to win the Euros, where we lost to Spain in the final. The play ended on a kind of upbeat note, and he's now rewritten it, the second half of the play, to accommodate grim reality of that 2-1 defeat. And it's a piece of extraordinary theatre. It's utterly magical, and I'll tell you what it does. It makes you realise that Gareth Southgate is a mensch, is a profoundly impressive man who really took on an awful lot of ingrained bigotry and prejudice during his public and private performance as England manager. So when he was selected to give the Dimbleby Lecture this year, an extraordinarily prestigious invitation, I'm not sure people who were not fully across Southgate's background would have known quite what to expect. He has targeted two things effectively. He's targeted the absence of role models for young men and the hideous, callous, to use his words, manipulative and toxic influences who have moved into the vacuum created by this lack of or absence of traditional societal father figures. I don't know if you've watched Adolescence yet, the Stephen Graham show. This isn't about kids who haven't got dads necessarily. It's about kids whose dads are powerless or unaware of the influences that are exerting their malign power upon their sons. I want to play you a couple of clips from the speech that Gareth Southgate gave. The first looks at that lack of role models, and the second will look at another element that perhaps explains why they are so vulnerable to the callous, manipulative and toxic influences. Have a listen to this, because you take anything away from that play, it's the idea that you can be a failure, as in he didn't actually win an international tournament, despite completely rewriting England's form book on the international stage. So you can be both a failure and an enormous success.
Young men are suffering. They're feeling isolated. They're grappling with their masculinity and with their broader place in society. As real-world communities and mentorship declines, young men end up withdrawing, reluctant to talk or express their emotions. They spend more time online searching for direction and are falling into unhealthy alternatives like gaming, gambling and pornography. We need leaders to set the right tone, to be the role models we want for our young men. We have to show young men that character is more important than status, that how you treat others is more important than how much money you make, that values matter, courage, humility and integrity over selfishness, greed, arrogance. The culture we create today will shape the kind of men that we inherit tomorrow.
30 minutes after 11. That's a really powerful point, isn't it? The culture we create today will shape the culture that we inhabit tomorrow. And that question of status is something he picked up on later. I really recommend that you listen to the entire speech that he gave last night while I was on the South Bank watching a play about him. It's funny how the world turns sometimes. He picked up on that theme of status a little later, and I don't know whether this will hold up, But at first glance, it sounded to me a bit like the male equivalent of the body image issues we've talked a lot about with regard, largely but not exclusively, to young women. The idea that you're looking at an unattainable ideal online, and the fact that you both seek to achieve it and can't is of extraordinarily destructive psychic power. I wonder whether he's describing young men having a similar relationship with both online faux perfection, unattainability, and desire.
I believe the world for young men and women that are growing up in today is increasingly difficult. Not because they're born weaker or without the resilience of past generations, but because the pressures they face today are unique. Today, young people are bombarded by information at all times of the day. From a device that fits neatly into the palm of their hand, they're targeted with images of the perfect body, the perfect career, and the perfect life. A beautifully crafted highlights reel where success appears to be instant and effortless. How can this make them feel good about themselves? When I was growing up, the only people I had to compare myself to were the other kids on my street, in my school, or my football team. I was a bit of an idiot. There were some idiots over there. I knew roughly where I stood in the pecking order, really. Realised nobody was perfect. But now you can find yourself mocked, bullied, or ridiculed if it appears that you don't conform to whatever is deemed to be the latest trend of the day.
I don't know that this will work, and I haven't got any time really to set it up, but I'm wondering when older people realised how different it is for younger people. And I'm going to focus on men today. When did you realise that the challenges that young men face today are profoundly different from the ones that we faced when we were young? Why are young boys, in your view, and anyone can answer this, mums, dads, uncles, teachers, formerly young men like me, we were all young ones, increasingly hard though that may be to believe. Why do you think they are so potentially lost and or susceptible to these toxic online influences? I'd like to get stuck into that straight away and spare you my own pontifications on the subject, because you've just had the pleasure of listening to Sir Gareth's. But it's up to you. If you don't ring in, then you'll get another monologue. So it's entirely up to you. Why do you think young men are struggling so much in ways crucially that are new and different? Some of them won't be. Some of them will be old and well documented, but in specific challenges of the modern era. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Hit the numbers now or get another monologue.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 19 minutes after 11. I think we'll probably split the difference. So a few of my thoughts, and then we'll throw open the phone lines, of which there are still a few free. 0345 6060 973. I sometimes have to qualify that this is not like, if you're new to the show, this isn't like all the other phone-ins you've listened to. I don't want to hear about your role models from the 1950s. Sorry. I'm sure it's interesting. I look forward to getting your autobiography when you self-publish it. But I'm interested in talking about the challenges that young people face today and what it is that makes them so vulnerable to some of the phenomena that Gareth Southgate has described. What I really want you to do is talk to me about your sons and your nephews and about... I mean, the hardest thing to do, and we get this so much on the programme, don't we? The hardest thing to do is to imagine yourself truly in somebody else's shoes, because there are so many variables to those shoes, most obviously generational. So you know that you think immediately. I do this all the time. I used to do it at universities until I suddenly realised what an idiot I was being. I just heard Gary, that Southgate refer to himself and other men as idiots. We'll get that texter back from yesterday who was explaining why that's bigoted and misandric. You can't. I can't talk about university now through the lens of my own university experiences, because they are two completely different propositions. Financially, academically, socially, everything has changed. You can't talk about what it's like to be 14 today with reference to what it was like to be 14 then. You can't say, well, it worked for me in 1986. Is that right? 1972 plus 14, 86. Yeah, it worked for me in 1986. Therefore, it would work for you now. We didn't have a smartphone in 1986. No one had ever heard of Andrew Tate in 1986. The kind of hideous influences that existed were much, much, much, much, much, much harder to find in 1986. You didn't have the obsession with status. You didn't have the fear of the future. You didn't have you hadn't just come out of a pandemic when you're essentially locked in your bedroom for months on end. All of these modern phenomena make it ridiculous to look at some of these issues from the perspective of what it was like when you were 14. My son's first mobile phone had a porn site in his address book. He didn't open it, but he came to me to find out what it was, says Vincent. So presumably a second-hand phone. I realise young people have it much harder now. About 20 years ago, when I was forced into contact with a gang member who was involved in terrible violence due to, quotes, respect, end quotes. And Richard says, it's like Gareth said, we live in an instant society. Everything needs to happen now, this minute. That was me flicking my fingers. Don't adjust your sets. If we don't have it now, this minute, we become frustrated. Everything is disposable, and they are encouraged to believe that that includes relationships and women. The number of people I know in this category is awful. So where is it? What are the reasons that people need help with to understand why young men today are A, in danger of becoming a lost generation, and B, susceptible to the misogynistic influences like Tate? Neil is on the Black Isle even in the Highlands. Neil, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
It's my second time of calling you, but
welcome.
Now listen. I've got a 14-year-old son. I'm a little bit older than you as well. Okay. So I've also got kids who are in their 30s.
Okay.
Now, the difference in parenting my kids that are in their 30s and my kid, Ollie, who is now 14, it is a different world.
Of course it is.
It is a different world. I mean, it's not enough for me to say, well, it was fine when I was a kid. No. I grew up fine. It was much different for my kids that are now in their 30s. So, I mean, one of my sons is a Royal Marine Commando. You know, he's a real hard guy, but he has been able to have this influence on my son, who was being seduced in some way by Andrew Tate videos.
Why? Now, why was he? Just back up a bit, because remember, we haven't heard this story before. You've lived it. Why was he vulnerable to that now, do you think, thinking about it now?
The simple fact is, I probably gave him too much access to his smartphone.
That's how. That's not why.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the why is it's easy. It's a simple solution. It's projecting the image. I mean, Andrew Tate is obviously in incredibly good shape. He's got this fleet of cars, and he gives these incredibly simple solutions that these lads, very often some of them who are struggling with their own identity.
Well, that's it, isn't it? That bit there. Young men, Southgate said last night, are suffering. They are feeling isolated. They're grappling with their masculinity and with their broader place in society.
Absolutely. Now,
go on.
I became more aware of Andrew Tate when he started telling me, it was words like, I don't want to go to university, I want to get out into the real world.
Yeah.
And then he starts talking about things like crypto. He starts talking about things like drop shipping. Now, I didn't really know what they were, so I made a point of actually deciding to educate myself about it. And then I watched the Channel 4 documentary that was on, I think it was last year, I Am Andrew Tate.
Right.
And I said to Ollie, right, come on, we're going to watch this. And I could see things changing when he was, you're watching Andrew Tate physically slapping women, the abusive, hideous, foul languages that he was using.
He'd been unaware of that
women
because of the very carefully curated public presentation designed to seduce boys like yours.
Yeah.
Any guilt on your part? Any shame?
Yes, because
I'm teasing you.
No, but I do. I sometimes think, hang on, I should have been all over this a little bit more.
And that's where the phone comes in, because you can't
I was a police officer for a long time.
Right.
I'm now a writer, and I now write crime books. And this actually prompted me to want to use this as a jumping on part, to actually be able to talk about situations like Andrew Tate, like people, like disaffected young men, very often disaffected young men who feel their life is not as they want it to be because they can't get a girlfriend. And then to blame women for that, to blame women on this. We hear about this. It was on that, the terrific Stephen Graham show.
Have you watched it, Neil?
I have, yeah. It blew me away.
It comes from a similar place from your next book, I think, doesn't it? Is there not some crossover?
Well, the next book, I use male violence against women.
Yeah.
I use essentially incels, and I mean, obviously, I base it in Scotland, so it's they're using it, they're shoving women off cliffs, and they're doing it for fun. They think they found the perfect crime, and obviously now.
And that is the bit that our generation struggle with. You're a bit older than me. The hatred of women, and when you see that. And I don't want to give any spoilers. I haven't watched the Stephen Graham thing yet, but I've read enough about it to probably know exactly what happens in every episode. But that's what we struggle with. The actual hate. I know misogyny is as old as humanity itself, but the hatred of women.
And it's exactly that. There is this amongst a certain section of community. And when you hear the way Andrew Tate will talk about women, he's not talking about them from a position of love, of companionship, of wanting to build futures together. I heard what his attitude was about how he would select a man for his daughter, and she would have to obey him. And he talks about them like they don't matter. And this is a very easy and very simple solution to a young man who might be himself struggling with his own self-identity and the warped view of masculinity, which is a real scourge, and I don't know how to deal with it.
Well, you've kind of answered my next question. You got your boy back from the brink, did you? You think, or not?
No, he thinks he's an idiot now. I've actually...
Well done. Well, then you do have some answers to these questions. Then, well, I mean, if someone listening to this is where you were that night when you sat down to watch the documentary together, what would you say to them?
Don't turn away from it.
Yeah.
Engage with it and educate yourself about what is being espoused online. You've got to know what's happening. Now, that means you've got to look at some really vile content.
Oh, wow. Of course you do.
You do.
You can't ostrich it.
No, it's damaging to watch. I hate watching it. It fills me with rage when I actually watch what this man says. And it's not just him. We focus on Andrew Tate, but we've just seen Conor McGregor get welcomed into the White House.
We have.
Now, that is, again, a man, an adjudicated, I use my words carefully, an adjudicated rapist. And he's being welcomed with a rug.
You're the ex-copper. You're the ex-copper. I'm going to clarify still further, and I'm going to say found in a civil case to have sexually assaulted a woman who accused him of rape.
Indeed.
And he's been, and you're right, and the red carpet has been rolled out for him by Donald Trump, the president.
Again, we are seeing it there. Donald Trump is I won't...
No, let's not.
Cheeks of the same.
Two cheeks of the same backside. I can live with that, and I know that isn't why you rang in, but I'm going to do it anyway. The what's the new book called? Is it When Shadows Fall?
Yeah.
And you are Neil Lancaster, one of my favourite crime writers, and not to make light of a very serious subject, one of the favourite things that happens to me on this show is when people that I like and admire from outside of the radio programme contribute to it in this exactly the same way that you do. No special treatment here. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. But the Max Craigie novels I've told you about before are absolutely banging. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:33. I've got a missed information for you a little later, and Natasha will be joining us shortly to set the scene for Prime Minister's questions this afternoon, but this is a subject we need to do more on, and we need to make it clear. Usually I get annoyed with men for bringing in when we're having subjects about women that are unique and specific to women. Having a conversation about the struggles that men face does not, texters who I am far too gallant to name or single out, it does not mean that we're ignoring violence against women or dealing with the consequences of this kind of misogyny that are obviously felt more keenly by women than anybody else. But, prevention is better than cure, isn't it? If you can deal with the toxicity that young men are being inculcated with, then it will not then emerge and be inflicted upon young women. I hope that's obvious, but I take responsibility for it not being obvious enough until now. 11:34 is the time. So why? Why is Sir Gareth Southgate so right when he describes this void being filled by a new kind of role model who do not have their best interests at heart, callous, manipulative and toxic influencers whose sole drive is for their own gain. They willingly trick young men, he said last night, into believing that success is measured by money or dominance, never showing emotion, and that the world, including women, is against them. They are as far away as you could possibly get from the role models our young men need in their lives. And before I go back to the phones, Leroy and Mark, I must stress this, all right? I know theatre's not cheap, but the National Theatre does have some pretty cool schemes to help people get into the theatre who might not otherwise. But this is among, I think, because you know I'm a sucker for theatre, and other things. Three of my favourite things in the world involved in the play I saw last night: theatre, therapy, football. All right? If you have more of all of those things, this world would be more theatre, more therapy, more football. And I'm not just saying that because we beat Scunthorpe 1-0 last night with a shot that was clearly intended to be a cross. But if you have a child, a son or a daughter, who loves football but thinks they don't like theatre, and you can take them to see this play. It's on at the National Theatre in London at the moment, Dear England, and then it transfers to the Lowry in Salford. So and then it goes on a national tour. Dear England, 2 words. If you have a child who loves football but thinks that they don't like theatre or literature or English as an academic subject, you know they love football but they think they don't like literature, if you take them to see this play, you will change their lives. I promise you. All right? Oh, all right, not will. May. Probably. No, will. You will change that. If you take them to, if they love football but don't think they like theatre, and I'm going to do something I never do. I'm going to look at the camera. All right? If you have a child, a son or a daughter, Keith, stop pulling faces. I'm trying to look serious, who loves football but thinks that they don't like theatre, literature, the arts, English as an academic subject, take them to see Dear England by James Graham, the National Theatre production, which is currently in London. Then it moves to Salford. Then it's going on national tour. I'm not Google. Look it up yourself. You will change their life. You'll give them something, even if it's only a glimpse, but it could be a lifetime of access to the world of imagination, the world of art and drama, and they'll thank you for it. Back to the phones. Leroy is in Ruislip on the subject of role models and Sir Gareth Southgate's interventions. Leroy, what made you pick up the phone?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello.
Yeah, just the whole subject. This is my life. This is what I do. And it's interesting what you just said there about changing lives. That is what it's all about. That's what needs to be done. And it's not as difficult as it may seem, really. To get onto I don't find it that difficult, and what we do, the coaches who we work with don't find it that difficult either. It's just getting the opportunity to get in front of these kids and get their attention, first of all.
So you're offering an alternative?
Yeah, big time. We're showing different pathways that they didn't sort of know existed.
How do you deal with the status issue? Because, I mean, I don't want to jump the gun, but the pathways you're showing them don't involve Lamborghinis and harems of oppressed women, and that is what at the moment they think they want. So how do you do that? How do you make them realise that's not what they want, or that that's not where happiness comes from?
By just presenting them with like relatable role models and giving like real life examples.
Yeah.
My own life example. I live in a house, I drive a car, I go on holiday, I eat food. I wear I'm always in tracksuit bottoms and trainers, but I wear tracksuit bottoms and trainers of my choice. And letting them know that that's what life's about. That's what's obtainable. Anything else is it's a problem. Some of these kids, their most relatable role models might be like a grime singer or something like that. But then I'm letting them know that there's only so much room in the industry for so many grime singers.
Yeah.
Some of the kids tell me they're going to be a Premiership footballer, but they don't play for any team or anything like that. They just presume that they're going to step into
this
that.
Isn't new. This is as old as the hills. I thought I was going to play in goal. I thought I was going to play in goal for Nottingham Forest when I was their age, and that was never, ever, ever going to happen.
Well, I thought I was going to be world welterweight champion because I wanted to follow my idol, Sugar Ray Leonard.
Fair enough.
I didn't, but because I carried on along that path and realised that it took hard work to get me anywhere near that, it led me to doing what I do now, which is, CEO of Sweet Science Foundation. We go into schools using boxing as a sort of like a Trojan horse to get these kids' attention, as I just mentioned.
Yes.
First of all, you've got to get their attention.
But I want to steer you, if I can, away from the things that would happen when we were young and into the role that these toxic influencers play.
Yeah.
What can you tell? Because I've just had a message from one of my oldest mates about their son, and they're worried about their son. And if they're one of my oldest mates, Leroy, then there are no prizes for guessing that they're pretty middle class, right? Mm-hmm. And so automatically it's not a socio-economic problem. We know that. Mm-hmm. Children from all sorts of backgrounds are susceptible. Can you tell the kind of boy who is more likely to fall for Andrew Tate's disgusting shtick than another boy, or is it pretty much every lad for himself? They're all vulnerable. They're all susceptible. I
think the programme Adolescence touched on that beautifully the other night. It's anyone. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And what the thing is that they're not being steered or shown that there are different directions they can go in that will give them all the joy they need out of life. Mm. One of the reasons, a couple of the reasons is there's too many distractions, James. Yeah. There's loads of distractions out there at the moment. There's a lack of relatable role models for these young people.
So what does a relatable role model look like? Your present company excluded. Mm-hmm. What are we offering? Are we because of Marcus Rashford, just thinking of the play last night, but he's a professional footballer, and we're trying to teach these kids that we can't all be like that. So you just mean a good man leading a good life with enough.
Exactly. The ideal that we have at Sweet Science Foundation is to get coaches who are local, right? Coaches who live in the area.
Okay.
And then they can see how this person lives, and it's a normal lifestyle. It's okay, it's acceptable, and if you want more, you work harder for it.
And if they live in the relevant area, then they have managed to avoid some of the pitfalls and some of the pratfalls that the young lads are exposed to these days. Although, of course, depending on their age, not necessarily the online influence and the online toxicity. Leroy, thank you. I normally balk a little bit at people who smuggle in references for the work that they do uninvited, but I think in the case of the Sweet Sciences Foundation, I will make an exception and allow it not only to pass but to be repeated by me, because it is obviously such important work that you do. Mark's in Worthing. Mark, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, basically, this subject is very close to my heart.
Yes.
Sorry, I just swallowed the saliva on the wrong side.
That's
I do
okay.
apologise.
No, mate, I'm always I've got a cough button. You haven't. Do you want to? Do you want to clear your throat and start again?
I'm okay. I'm okay now.
All right, well, thanks for all the detail there.
Sorry. Anyway, I listen to you every morning, James, and I can't live a day without it.
That's a lovely thing to say. Thank you.
You bring balance to my life, and so basically, my son is now 21.
Yeah.
And I say the last 10 years have been very difficult. Bear in mind, my son's had some pretty good role models in his life.
Yeah.
One of the problems, he was bullied at school.
Right.
Schools have a tendency of brushing everything under the carpet. And even when there's violence involved, not much gets done. And slowly, especially through lockdown, he became withdrawn. And although he had some good prospects in art, he was a very artistic boy, did some lovely paintings and everything.
Sure.
He sort of ended up in a very, very dark place. And the reason why I think most of these people or our kids end up in that dark place is there's a lack of prospect. When I was, raising, we had hoped that we could buy a house, that we could make a family, travel, this, that, and the other. But if we're honest, today, especially in the area I live, you're never going to buy a house.
So he weighs up what his options are. He looks at what he's likely to earn, and he doesn't see any really meaningful path ahead. And so you go one of two ways. You either become withdrawn and depressed, or you buy, or you can do both, I suppose, or you buy into the nonsensical fantasy worlds that people like Tate are selling.
Exactly.
What did he do? Has he fallen under the influence of any of these online characters?
Well, he has actually.
Right.
He started self-harming 4 years ago.
Right.
James, I've been through hell, and
I know you have.
I can't even tell you what it's been like.
I know you have.
But I managed to drag him out.
Right.
I had to take some time off work because I'm a 0-hour contract worker. I lost quite considerable amount of money over the last couple of years. But if I look at where he is today, thanks to medication as well, so some depression needs to be medically treated,
yes.
especially maybe at the beginning. He's now, looking at life under a different light. But I sense that at the moment, I have to be very close to him, keep an eye on him, asking question, why did this happen? What have you been doing? What have you not been doing? And everything. So I'm sort of his conscience following him around.
But what you remind us is that even if you've got a role model living under the same roof as you, that the distractions are now so constant and so complete that it can duck the bar, get under the bar. Mark, I'm out of time. I'd like to have spoken to you for longer, and I promise you we will talk again. But that idea of and I'll just tell you quickly, Michael and others have been in touch to say, what a good dad. And of course, we now worry about the lads who don't have dads like you. But we also acknowledge that the lads who do have dads like you are also going to be vulnerable and susceptible to this stuff. So I think Sir Gareth Southgate, he's by no means the first, has blown the lid off a really, really important issue, and the damage that is done to these young boys at an early age. I mean, the earlier it happens, the longer its impact will be. 11:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:48. It's funny. I had a categorical aversion to phone-ins about male role models when I started here 20 years ago because I didn't think they helped. And Leroy actually really brought home why. There's no point talking, and I know you mean well when you talk about, and everyone's now mentioning their favourite celebrity, Professor Brian Cox, or Jamie Oliver, or all of these people that are great role models. Sir Gareth Southgate is a great role model. Lots of great role models out there. Stormzy, in many ways, is a great role model. But you can't tell boys to aspire to being internationally exceptional individuals, because almost all of us are not going to be. Even if we had the talent, it's statistically impossible for us all to become the goalkeeper for Nottingham Forest, or Prime Minister, or a gob on a stick on the road. That's a bad example, but you take my point. So I've just worked out why, because other people used to do those phone-ins, and you'd sit there, and I don't know why I didn't like them. I'd sit there listening to people ringing in and go, Gary Lineker is a great role model, and you'd go, yeah, he is, isn't he? But this isn't a good phone-in. Why is this not a good phone-in? And I've suddenly, listening to Leroy, I've worked out why. You should be pointing at, Johnny at number 43, who goes out to work every day, has a loving relationship with his partner, is raising his children in a healthy and happy home. That's your role model. That's what that's why it never worked. That's why I never found it persuasive as a phone-in. I've got a very quick misinformation for you, because I think people like J.D. Vance and Donald Trump and the rest of them are part of the problem that we're describing. Nigel Farage, of course, has described himself as part of the same phenomenon as Andrew Tate, and I haven't heard him claim recently that he's very good mates with Donald Trump, because I've got a suspicion that his calls aren't being returned. But the point is this: they know that there is political power to be gained from harnessing the consequences of the toxicity and the hatred, particularly of women, that is being spread around by these influencers. So I think this matters.
Missed information.
Thank you, Emily. It was a story in today's Telegraph, actually, about Vance wanging on about immigration into the UK in the hope of whipping up more xenophobia and racism for reasons that remain slightly unclear. But the way the Telegraph wrote this story was fascinating, because they mention again the claim that you can be arrested in this country for praying. And listen to the way that they wrote it. At the Munich Security Conference in February, Vance lambasted allies for clamping down on free speech, and invoked the example of a British man, Adam Smith Connor, an army veteran who was arrested and convicted in 2022 after praying silently outside an abortion clinic. After praying silently outside an abortion clinic. So you could write, who was arrested and convicted in 2022 after eating a Savoy and chips out of a bag outside the fish and chip shop. I mean, he might have got arrested for something completely different. But if you're going to write it like that, you need me to be reading between the lines, because what this character was actually arrested for was refusing to move from somewhere where a public space protection order was in place. So anywhere near a family planning clinic or an abortion clinic, whatever you prefer to call it, nobody is allowed to linger there if it is believed that they are seeking to pass comment on what is happening there. So you can't protest against abortion, you can't defend a woman's bodily autonomy. And if the authorities think that you are, they will just ask you to move on. That's what happens. They'll say, I'm terribly sorry, sir, you're in a public space protection order, and we would like you to move on. Or can I ask what you're doing? To which he responds by saying, yes, I'm praying for my unborn son. So I am making a statement about abortion in this public space protection order. My unborn son who died, who was aborted 22 years ago. And then he refused to move. Not only that, he'd even been in touch with the council to tell them what he was going to be doing. So he was asked by a community officer who spoke to him for an hour and 40 minutes, but he refused. 75% of residents polled in that area support the introduction of a buffer zone at the site, which had, I say that again, 75% of residents support the introduction of a buffer zone. So he was indeed technically arrested after praying silently outside an abortion clinic, in the same way that you might be arrested later today, technically, after having a Savoy and chips outside Chris's Fish Bar on Turnham Green Terrace. But you'd have been arrested for nicking a car yesterday, or for, shoplifting from the rather splendid menswear shop 2 doors up. He was not arrested for praying silently. He was arrested for refusing to move after an hour and 40 minutes of conversation with a community officer from an area where he was not allowed to be if he was known to be doing the things that he told them he was doing. But you wouldn't know that from reading today's Daily Telegraph.
Missed information.
Let alone listening to JD Vance. Back to the boys. Ben's in West Kensington. Ben, what's going on?
Hi. I think the reason I'm thinking mainly about this at the moment is due to a friend of mine had a funeral last weekend.
Oh, I'm
and that
sorry.
was strictly, it's okay, but just strictly, I would say, due to mental health. And I think it's less of that fundamental thing of the Andrew Tate types. I think it's more just about men talking to each other.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. I guess this is the extreme of it, isn't it? Gaming, gambling, pornography, toxic influences, but loneliness.
And that isolation, I think, I think people don't get to, there's nothing in school to talk about, how we deal with those when we get those emotions. And I think the thing about Gareth Southgate, the idiots thing, I think we are, we are the idiots, but how do we combat that to become the idiots who can talk to each other?
That's a really powerful point. It's actually part of the play that I've been talking about all morning, and the one that I saw last night, which is about Gareth Southgate essentially fighting the FA to encourage when he brings a therapist in to the FA, encourages the players against a lot of early reluctance to talk more about their feelings, because if you've got to walk up in front of 80,000 people to take a penalty at Wembley, it's probably quite a good idea to be in a good place mentally before you do it.
And being able to walk up and talk to 80,000, but being able to talk up to one mate,
To one mate. Well, that's what they do in the dressing room. They encourage each other to talk about what they're frightened of, No one ever talks about what they're frightened of.
I think trying to find that way in which men can do that, and I don't know what level that lies, whether it is in school or in therapy has been, I'm sure, has been helpful to many people. Just talking, having that one-to-one to talk to someone else,
And so ask your mate, check in occasionally, not to be glib or to make light of your loss, but check in with your friends occasionally, mate. Because I think we know on some level the ones that we should be a little bit worried about. Just check in with them, go out with them, do something with them, make an appointment. I mean, I know this sounds lightweight, but it's got to be better than nothing, and it might actually turn out to be quite heavyweight. Ben, thank you. PMQs is on the horizon. Jake has been in touch to say, I was arrested for eating a Mars bar while taking photographs outside a military base, which is exactly how the Daily Telegraph would report the story, judging by how they've written up JD Vance. Natasha Clark is here. PMQs is on the horizon.
Sorry, I'm just laughing.
You like that? He's good, yes.
That's really good.
You never laugh at my jokes like that.
I do, that's not true, I do. Outrage as man arrested for eating Mars bar.
Yes.
Exactly in street.
That. Yes, JD Vance says you can get arrested for eating a Mars bar in the United Kingdom.
And the last paragraph, it would said, the Ministry of Defence was approached for comment and said he was taking illegal photos outside the military.
We're shutting down Voice of America and deporting people who've committed no crimes. But hey, it's freedom of speech outside an abortion clinic in Glasgow that you need to worry about.
How dare they?
Do we have time to have a little look at that reform story from earlier in the week? So this was a magnificent day for Nigel Farage, announcing how many brand new councillors.
Well,
I saw all the headlines, Natasha.
He claimed that there were 29 new councillors.
29 new councillors for reform, which means 29 seats being fought in the looming council elections in May.
But wait.
What?
But wait, it is not the case, James.
Oh, surely not.
16 of them in areas where the council is now up for debate and their jobs could be completely scrapped. And I wonder why that would be the case, that somebody from the Conservative Party, from an independent party, might decide to join reform. Well, it's because they're opposing all of these council restructures. And exactly why is that? Because they believe that is exactly the areas in which they will make gains. So, yes, this is a big announcement from Nigel Farage yesterday. Not quite what it seems. I think that's fair to say. The Conservatives have called it a sham announcement. They say that of the 29 councillors that Nigel paraded on stage, they say only 7 of them were new. 22 of them having been announced previously.
Actually announced before, not just quietly signing up.
And including some of them, they've actually been pictured with Nigel Farage a couple of weeks before. So no, not particularly new at all. But yes, I think the most interesting part of that more than half of them in areas where council's completely about to be ripped up anyway and could go as part of the government's local government restructure.
So
they might not
new,
even have a job.
So not new and quite possibly not councillors.
Yeah, well,
sooner
not
rather than
long.
later. But they did get one from the Lib Dems. That must be
they did get one from the Lib Dems. One of them was also very much a serial defector as well. Let me find. There was one person that had joined. This was it, Mandy Clare. She was from Chester West and Chester Council. She has been a member of the Labour Party. She's been a member of the Socialist Labour Party. She's been a member of the Workers' Party of Britain, the Party of Women, the hyper-local Winsford Salt of the Earth Party, and then an independent, and then she's joined the Reform Party.
She's a party animal.
she loves being a member of a political party. But yes, this is just one of the
And tell me about the Lib
list.
Dem guy. The Lib Dem guy had quite an interesting CV, I think.
The Liberal Democrat. Is this the one that was removed from the Liberal Democrats group on North Somerset Council after social media posts praising Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and for repeating Tommy Robinson's false claims about a Syrian refugee?
Libelous claims.
That
That's
was
the
the
fella.
one.
Yeah, so
That's
he's
the
one
one.
of the new. He's one of the new sign-ups as well to a party whose head of vetting has previously praised Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, this is Stuart Davis previously of North Somerset Council, before an independent, and before that, a Liberal Democrat.
Now, I'm not very good at this stuff, Natasha.
Politics.
Why would Nigel Farage be exposing himself to such ridicule and humiliation in preference to staying... So what was he trying to distract attention from by pretending that he had 29
that guy,
new...
what was his name? I've forgotten his name. You know, the guy we've been talking about for the last 3 weeks that nobody outside of Westminster knows.
Rupert something.
Rupert Bear? No, Rupert... Rupert
Campbell
Lowe.
Black.
Rupert... no,
sorry.
other one.
Sorry.
Other one. Another good Rupert. Yes, Rupert Lowe, the guy that had a huge fight with Nigel Farage a couple of weeks ago. And yes, Nigel Farage is absolutely desperate now to stop talking about Rupert Lowe and to focus on what will be, I'm sure, quite a successful set of elections for the Reform Party. They're going to win seats anyway. So it does beg the question of why focus quite so heavily on trying to say that you've got loads of support, loads of people coming over to your party, when, you know, they're doing quite well in the polls. They're going to take a lot of council seats anyway. You know, I just think I'm not
Sits
quite
it
sure
out
it would
like
have been,
he always does.
Yeah, it would have been the fight I wouldn't have run.
PMQs, quickly, what's going to happen?
I think we might focus on another international PMQs today.
Not welfare. Is there not a lot they can say about this?
Well, if you're Kemi Badenoch, what do you say?
Good God, there's a thought.
What do you say? So if you woke up in the morning and you're Kemi Badenoch, where do you go?
You haven't gone far enough.
No. Well, that's exactly what the
But
Tories
you've gone
are saying
further
today.
than we did.
Exactly.
Tricky again then.
It's a really difficult one for them.
I think international.
I think they may pick up on a bit of welfare. They may pick up on the splits within the Labour Party that are starting to emerge. That seems like one that Kemi Badenoch could go on. But obviously Ukraine, Putin, hopes of that ceasefire deal on a knife edge. The Prime Minister is very much behind some of those talks. He was talking to Zelensky last night, talking to Trump last night. I wonder if the Kemi Badenoch might push him on that. Also a big speech yesterday, which my colleague Aggie Chambray was at, on net zero, and Kemi Badenoch talking about how she doesn't want a target for net zero to be set in law anymore. I think she thinks that can be quite a dividing line between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party.
Except it was cross-party cooperation, wasn't it?
Well, it was actually, of course, something under Theresa May and the last Conservative government. Kemi Badenoch will say, well, I stood up in House of Commons and talked about it. I talked about the fact that I didn't think it was going going to work at the time. People will say, well, not very loudly enough. But I think she wants to try and make this something that she thinks that she can fight the election on. Some dividing line, a clear bit of blue water between Tories and Labour.
I think Adam Bienko from Byline Times was telling us yesterday it doesn't actually poll that well among even Conservative supporters, opposition to
in terms of the specific, no, not in and I don't think she's opposed to net zero at all. I think she is opposed to the way it's being done, which it does seem like there are a lot of MPs, a lot of people in the country who are worried about what the costs might look like in terms of having to upgrade your car, having to upgrade your boiler, and those are legitimate concerns, I think.
Do you want the good news or the bad news?
I'll have the bad ones first, please.
The bad news is I've pressed a button, Keith, and all my screens have gone blank.
Oh no.
The good news is PMQs is on the way, so I don't need my switchboard.
We've got 20 minutes to figure this out.
Yeah, exactly that. So that's serendipity in action. And this is one of those moments where I remind you that we will be crossing live imminently to the House of Commons as soon as Kemi Badenoch gets to her feet and poses her first question to Sir Keir Starmer.
This is the second last one before the spring statement.
Right.
Kemi Badenoch was talking quite a lot about the economy last week. If I were her, again, I would expect her to talk about the economy, to talk about bills going up, living standards, growth, cost of living crisis, something that I do think resonates with a lot of people at the moment. Do you feel better off under Labour? And a lot of people I don't think do.
So it wasn't me. Someone else was resetting the screen. It was you. Did you press did no one tell me? What? And you engineering just did it and you forgot to tell me. So I'm sitting here thinking that I've broken the studio. Yeah. All right.
Sometimes it's good for you to have a little,
keeps
get
me
taken.
on my toes.
Exactly,
keeps me on my toes.
Yeah, you're going to have to think of something fresh
Left field
to say.
suggestion. Can we conceive of a world in which the Conservatives berate the Labour Party for being too hard on disabled people?
For being too hard. No, I don't think that Kemi Badenoch would do that.
That would be a moment.
No, but Ed Davey, of course. We haven't done Ed Davey predictions, but his son, disabled, he's a carer. Might he mention the PIP benefits cuts that we're seeing?
I think he probably
I think it might be something. And again, on Gaza and Israel as well, an underreported topic, usually at Prime Minister's questions. We have seen fighting and attacks break out again overnight after quite a number of weeks of relative peace there. So
in terms of
Davey, I think.
In terms of meaningful policy, he's the proper leader of the opposition at the moment in terms of like substantive challenge, as opposed to crowd pleasing or anti-woke posing. Davey is a much bigger. Here is Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor claimed that her budget was a once-in-a-Parliament reset. Yeah. So why are we having an emergency budget next week?
Mr. Speaker, we have delivered record investment into this country, had 3 interest rates cut in a row, and wages are going up faster than prices, which is a massive cost of living boost. That's after only 8 months, after 14 years of absolute failure. What do they do? Interest rates 11%, massive 22 million black hole in the economy. They crashed the economy. We're rebuilding Britain.
Mr. Speaker, he knows why we're having an emergency budget, because since the last one, since the Chancellor delivered her budget in October, growth is down, borrowing is up, and she has destroyed business confidence. Does the Prime Minister now regret raising taxes on business?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker. The OBR will present their numbers. There'll be a spring statement next week. But, Mr. Speaker, she still hasn't. We've got record investment into this country. Interest rates have been cut, and she talks about national insurance. We had to fill the 22 billion black hole that they left. We've invested in the NHS, in schools and public services. We're pressing on with planning, with infrastructure and regulation. But I understand the Leader of the Opposition is straight talking, so perhaps she can help us with this. Is she going to reverse the next increase? If not, what's the point? If so, what other taxes is she raising to fill the hole? One way or the other.
You're in government. Speaker, the only black hole is the one that he is digging. He's shown absolutely no regret, but everybody knows the Chancellor has made a mistake. That is why they're having an emergency budget. Later today, Conservatives will vote to exempt hospices, pharmacies and care providers from her national insurance rise. Will he, at the very least, support exempting these vulnerable services from his jobs tax?
Minister.
I noticed she didn't say they're going to reverse the national insurance rises. It's exactly what she wants all the benefits, but they can't say how they're going to pay them. She carps from the sideline, but can't make her mind up whether she supports or doesn't support national insurance rises. We've made provision for hospices, we've made provisions for charities, but we had to secure the economy. We had to fill the £22 billion black hole that they disgracefully left.
Mr. Speaker, he hasn't made these provisions. He keeps talking about budget benefits. Unemployment is not a benefit. Businesses closing are not benefits. I asked him whether he would exempt hospices, even children's hospices, from the jobs tax. He did not answer that question. His MPs know that this could affect end-of-life care. So I will ask the same question again. Will he exempt hospices from paying his jobs tax?
Mr. Speaker, we've already invested £100 million for adult and children's hospices, an additional £26 million in funding through the Children's Hospices grant, but we can't get away with what we were doing in that budget, the root cause, which was fixing the economy they left so badly damaged, a £22 billion black hole. Perhaps you start the next question with an apology.
Mr. Speaker, I remember when he made... They want me to answer questions, then we can swap sides. I remember when he made that announcement. He's forgotten because the money he's referring to for hospices is for buildings. It is not for the salaries hit by the jobs tax. As St. Helena Hospice in Colchester said, we cannot use this funding for salaries, which is where we need urgent help. Why is the Prime Minister not listening to hospices?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've already set out the position in relation to hospices. She says that she wants to swap sides. I mean, heaven forbid. After 14 years of breaking everything, we're getting on with the job of fixing it, and all she can do is carp from the sidelines with absolutely no policy.
Mr. Speaker, winter fuel payments have been snatched. The jobs tax is hammering everyone from business to charities. The Chancellor promised a once-in-a-Parliament budget that she would not come back for more. And in that budget, she said there will be no extension of the freeze in income tax thresholds. Ahead of the emergency budget, will he repeat?
It is. It's what it is.
Mr. Speaker, ahead of the emergency budget, will he repeat the commitment that she made?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she's got such prescriptive questions, she can't actually adapt them to the answers that I'm giving. I mean, Mr. Speaker, I think she now calls herself a Conservative realist. Well, I'm realistic about the Conservatives. The reality is they left open borders and she was the cheerleader. They crashed the economy, mortgages went through the roof, the NHS was left on its knees, and they hollowed out the armed forces. This government has already delivered 2 million extra NHS appointments, 750 breakfast clubs, record returns of people who shouldn't be here, and a fully funded increase in our defence spending. That is the difference that a Labour government makes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A lady came to see me recently who needed help. She had a disability. It meant that her children have to help her cut up her food. They have to help her wash beneath the waist. They have to supervise her as she goes to the toilet. Under the Tory welfare system, we were able to get that lady on PIP. Under the Prime Minister's new proposed system, she will get zero. Nothing. And after 14 years of the Tory government, and many of us wanting to see the back of them, can the Prime Minister answer one question? What was the point if Labour are going to do this?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've lived with the impact of a disability in our family through my mother and brother all my life. I do understand the human impact of this, but the current system is morally and economically indefensible, and we're right to reform it, and nobody should be defending the broken status quo. We are proceeding on 3 principles: that if you can work, you should work. If you need help into work, the state should help you, not hinder you. And if you can never work, you must be supported and protected. They are the right principles, but we can't leave the current system as it is.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Can I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks on Ukraine and Gaza? And can I also pay tribute to Group Captain John Paddy Hemingway and all our heroes from the Battle of Britain? I know that members across this House will, like me, have heard from GPs, dentists, community pharmacists and care homes who are all deeply worried about the impact of the national insurance rise on the services they provide to patients. That's why the House of Lords passed a Liberal Democrat amendment to exempt NHS and care providers. That amendment comes before this House this afternoon, but we're hearing worrying reports that the Prime Minister will order Labour MPs to vote against it. Will the Prime Minister reassure this House and patients across the country that these reports are not true?
Prime Minister.
Can I start by pointing out that because of the changes we made at that budget, we were able to put record amounts of money into our National Health Service, and vitally important that we did so. And it isn't right to simply oppose the measures we had to take to raise the money and at the same time say, as the Honourable Gentleman does, that he wants the benefits of the increase in funding for the NHS. The two can't sit together. We have already invested an additional £3.7 billion of funding into social care, including £880 million to increase the social care grant. So we are taking steps. But the basic point remains, which is we can't make the investment into the NHS if we don't raise the money. And you can't simply oppose any raising of money and at the same time welcome the money into the NHS.
Sir Ed Davey.
I'm disappointed by that reply, and I hope he and the Chancellor will think about taking money from the NHS ahead of the spring statement and reverse it. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to turn to the issue of illegal hair coursing. Criminal gangs are terrorising rural communities across our country, from Cambridgeshire to Devon, from Oxfordshire to Wiltshire. Men in balaclavas are threatening and abusing farmers as these criminals tear across their fields in 4x4s.
There's no way to speak about the Prime Minister.
Farmers are warning that it's only a matter of time before someone is killed. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that we must act urgently against this appalling criminality? And will he back our calls for a comprehensive rural crime strategy so we can not just stamp out hair coursing, but keep our rural communities safe from all crime?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising this important issue, and it is a matter of deep concern. We've already developing a rural crime strategy, but we'll happily work with him and others to develop it further.
Lawrence Turner.
The Northfield are deeply concerned.
It's slightly embarrassing when PMQs, which involves, if you include the Speaker, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different individuals and a room full of braying humans, can bring it in bang on the junction in a way that I never managed to do. It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
17 is the time. I can't believe you didn't see the hair coursing question coming.
I can't believe I didn't predict that.
Just outrageous.
Honestly,
Patrick points out that you're losing your touch already.
I really am. I'm so sorry. I thought he was going to raise something important like Gaza and Israel, but clearly no. I'm so sorry.
I don't know. Have I said this before? I think she got him there, didn't she? She had the edge. Possibly late equaliser, maybe, for Keir Starmer, but not necessarily.
Yeah, I think, look, the economy is clearly proving to be one of Kemi Badenoch's strongest topics, I think, isn't it? And
doesn't have to be, but I mean, I think for her to do well, he has to do badly as well.
Yes, absolutely. And he came across a little bit ratty today, didn't he? He was a little bit squabbly. He started to throw his toys out the pram, and I wrote down angry on my notes. Angry Starmer. She, why doesn't she come and make an apology in her next answer for the way the Conservatives left the country? That that came to me as a little bit ratty.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think she did all right. That was probably one of her stronger Prime Minister's questions and responses. And like I say, it has Labour on the back foot on a number of issues. The budget, we've got the spring statement coming up, the national insurance rise. They're absolutely sticking by their promises to continue with it. No chance that the government are going to reverse that as far as we're hearing. Taxes have gone up. They're talking about trying to make an emergency budget a thing. I don't know if it's going to be a thing or not. The government is saying it's going to be a normal spring statement with no budgetary measures in it. However, if Rachel Reeves does break her fiscal rules, she's going to have to come forward with something next week to try and balance the books out. And that leads us into this welfare debate that we've been having this week. Lots of Labour MPs fear that the reason why the government have had to come forward with this welfare statement, these cuts to personal independence payments and other welfare bills, is because they're trying to balance the books. It's not the case. It's just not the case. They're not going to do these welfare payments cuts for another couple of years. It's not going to be impacting anything from Rachel Reeves is doing this year. But it doesn't look like a great look, doesn't it, when you've got your own Labour backbenchers saying, why are you cutting my constituents' benefits? And it does play into the hands of reform, doesn't it? And because you've got people who are now saying, what's the difference between the government and the Conservative Party? They're both cutting benefits. They're both quite hard on disabled claimants. And doesn't that just, I think, play into the hands of people like Nigel Farage who just say, they're all the same?
I suppose it does in that sense. Although, as we touched on earlier, it prevents the Tories from using it as much of an attack line at the same time, but that creates that third wheel, I suppose. Chris says Starmer taking a right kicking today. Andy saying, as awful as Badenoch is, that was not great from Starmer. When Johnson et al. Tried to throw questions back at PMQs, I didn't like it, and I like it no more from him. He sounded a bit panicked, possibly due to a flatlining economy and the threat of Farage Limited. And Liam, I hope you're all right, mate. He says, my £22 billion black hole drinking game was not a good idea today.
Yeah, how many times? You said at least 3 I've written down, but it could be more. And like I say, I wonder how long we can get away with this line for. Do you still think
we
it's a
do this
strong
every
one?
week, don't we?
do.
And I think in the great scheme of things, you become more right every week.
Yeah,
because the road starts running out, doesn't it? But I would remind you, and a question of whether it was efficacious or not is moot. I would remind you that at the last general election, Tories were still telling actual lies about Gordon Brown being responsible for the global financial crisis of 2008. So they did inherit a massive black hole, and it never ceases to be relevant. But that does not translate into electoral calculus.
But
necessarily, it might.
It worked really well for the Tories when they came into power to say it's the last government.
Yeah, largely because every newspaper in the country was complicit in the lie.
Potentially, but I just think as a political attack line, it worked incredibly well for them, whether or not you believe that it's the papers following the politicians or vice versa. It worked well for them. Starmer is taking a leaf out of that Cameron George Osborne playbook by trying to do that. An interesting point, however, from the Prime Minister, and I thought that he would take the opportunity to do this today. When Kemi Badenoch asked him, would you like to extend the freeze in income tax thresholds? This is obviously something that the last government put into place. They extended, they froze income tax bans. It basically means that as you go up, you're dragged, more and more people are being dragged into the higher tax bands because, our wages are going up through inflation. This is obviously, I think, going to be a problem for Keir Starmer again and again and again. All of these old policies that the Conservative government put in place. Labour at the time opposed this, but now if they decide to reverse it, it's going to cost them a heck of a lot of money to do so, and Labour just don't have the money to do that. And today, Keir Starmer not ruling out extending that income tax threshold. There's lots of things that this Labour government want to do. They don't have the money to do so. They can't do it all in one go.
Well, unless they raise taxes.
Yeah, exactly. Which it doesn't feel like they're gonna do that. So
I'm interested. I'm increasingly drawn to this wealth tax rhetoric of people like Dale Vinson. There's an organisation called Patriotic Millionaires who've got a battle bus that's touring the country at the moment. I don't know what the precedent is in other countries, whether it's been tried or not, but you just bring in a relatively low percentage on money over a certain threshold and then shake them by the hand and congratulate the wealthiest people in the country on doing so much to help keep the rest of us afloat.
I'd like to know, though, of those groups, and I don't know if this question was asked to them when I think they did come on LBC, I believe it was yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
So spokesperson came on. There is many formats you can pay extra tax if you want to. I'd be really curious to know how many of them already do so.
Oh, you mean avoid...
Voluntarily so?
No, you can't turn it into donations.
Why not?
Because it's taxation. It has to be a societal prerequisite.
But these guys are saying we want to pay more tax.
Yeah, but it doesn't.
Put your money where your mouth is.
No. It's not.
No?
You can't. Making a donation lets everybody off the hook. A wealth tax is about recalibrating a society in a way that reflects not only the unfair distribution of wealth, which you don't fix by having some people voluntarily redistributing their wealth.
No, it definitely doesn't fix the answer.
And also, the thing I was talking to that fascinating Danish economist about last week, Emma Holton, putting value on things other than money. And you only do that by spreading the money around. I take your point. If you really want to pay more tax, nobody's stopping you. But that doesn't fix the national problem.
No, I agree with you there. And look, this is not something that a Labour government, I don't think, want to go near. They are trying very hard to stay near the middle of the ground with this one.
I don't think they do either. A lot of people tell me they tried it in Spain and it didn't work. Ollie picks up on one point we are discussing every week at the moment. If the Tories got to mention a post-it note every day for 14 years, which will be the Liam Byrne one, I think a £22 billion black hole is worth going on about for a while yet.
True, yeah, you're probably right. They really did absolutely egg that. I mean, I used to groan when Greg Cairns took out that blooming letter out of his pocket, and he seemed to hold it together with sellotape and just brandish it around every occasion, which, not great.
There's a blast from the past. Greg Cairns. Speaking of blasts from the past, Matt Hancock giving evidence today. Is it about the COVID inquiry?
COVID inquiry, yeah.
Do we know when he shaved his head?
I don't. We were slightly laughing behind the scenes about this.
Surely not. It looks fantastic.
It looks like a little egg.
Or a peanut.
I'm so sorry, Matt. He just looks like an egg.
It comes to us all, I think. Fred picks up on that point about volley. He says you're citing charity when what's needed is justice. That's the difference between a donation, voluntary and compulsory.
But some of the criticisms of the Labour government is that they have already been, according to some critics anyway, I don't agree with them, but that they were already driving the top people paying top income tax away from the country, driving people who are already
I'm still here.
out of the country.
I'm still here. What?
You're a millionaire. And
on with Ed Davey.
Yes. We weren't expecting him to talk about. Sorry, what was it? Hair coursing.
Yeah. Did you know what that is?
I did grow up in the countryside, but I really don't know what this means.
Well, I don't
hair
think,
coursing.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially putting dogs after hares.
Right.
It's a hideous practice, and there have been some tales recently, which you've understandably missed, about sort of communities being completely thrown into disarray by big 4x4s turning up on arable land that is not theirs and hosting sort of impromptu hair coursing events, which are hideous and horrible, and the kind of people doing it are not very amenable to being politely approached and asked to stop. So Liberal Democrats, of course, have a lot of rural constituencies.
They do. But what was interesting was Keir Starmer's response to him, and he said it was an important issue, something that's causing me deep concern or causing us deep concern. That's not really something you'd expect from something like this in terms of this issue. And it does sort of get your mind wandering. If Keir Starmer doesn't do well in the next election, and I know we're so far off that, and it's silly to even predict it, but what happens if Labour lose their majority and have to go knocking on the door of the Lib Dems to try and prop up a government? What might that look like? Is hair coursing going to be the glue that holds a potential coalition together between Labour and the Lib Dems?
You can't have a swing at Ed Davey for not being on electorally live. Of course, hair coursing is unlikely to be a massive manifesto demand or coalition demand, whereas care will be. So care, not hair.
Yeah, but you talk a lot about how you feel that Ed Davey is holding the government's feet to the fire a lot more than you feel the Conservatives are, right? Yeah. But if they were to get into bed together, as some may crudely put it, at the next election, it just makes me wonder what are the issues that would hold a Labour and Liberal Democrat coalition together, and what that would look like. And
foreign policy would be interesting, wouldn't it?
I mean, yeah, definitely, exactly. There's a lot of things I think that they don't agree on, and there's a lot of things that Ed Davey really, really holds his feet to the fire on. But what are the things that they actually agree on?
On a lighter note, when did he pause? Particularly when Ed Davey introduced the question about hair coursing, when your brain runs ahead of you,
I thought it was.
He said illegal hair. I, for some reason, thought he was going to say transplants.
It's because you had Matt Hancock on the brain.
Do you think that's what it was?
I genuinely do.
I was looking at Matt Hancock's peanut head.
Yeah, exactly.
And then Ed Davies said illegal hair, and my brain filled in the gap and said transplant.
There is one Labour MP who is accused of having it. I can't possibly say.
Good luck to people who do it. I'm absolutely no beef.
Disappeared away for a few weeks and then came back, and everybody thought they had had a hair transplant. Can neither confirm nor deny this scurrilous rumour that's going around Westminster at the moment.
And that brings us up pretty much to 5:30. I can tell you that the triple murderer who planned a mass shooting after killing his own family, his mother, his brother and his sister, is currently being sentenced. Some of the details in that sentencing are pretty graphic and pretty grim, so more on that as we have it. This is nice. Do you want a compliment?
Yeah.
Do you have to share it?
I don't have to share it?
No, you do have to share it.
Go on.
John's been in touch. He says, your chat is very entertaining. It's like being in the pub with two educated people.
That's so nice.
Isn't that nice?
That's lovely. Thank you so much, John.
And another John has said, what about hair care, James? Which probably needs a bit of work.
You've had a haircut.
I have had
It's very nice.
Hair care. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
32 is the time. I mean, when you write a book, you don't know, and it is a non-fiction book, and it speaks to the zeitgeist or to modern moments, modern issues. You don't know quite what the ecosystem is going to be like at the moment of publication. Suzanne O'Sullivan has written a book called The Age of Diagnosis, which seeks to explain why sickness, health and medicine, or rather sickness, health and why medicine has gone too far. But to come out, essentially, Suzanne, in a week after the actual health secretary started talking about overdiagnosis is serendipitous.
Indeed.
What is the central thesis of the book? What is the kind of shibboleth that you're taking aim at?
So I think for many years we have had a lot of assumptions about health. We assume that if we detect diseases earlier, we assume if we detect illnesses and diseases in their milder forms and help people, that we'll promote long-term health. But what you are risking with that is turning healthy people into patients. And I'm very concerned that we are, through excessive screening programs, turning healthy people into patients and medicalizing lives, and through excessive attention to kind of negative aspects of people's moods, etc., potentially risking, once again, just turning healthy people into patients and reinforcing difficulties rather than alleviating them.
You're a neurologist by training, and also an author. I don't want to sound like an idiot, but can I more layman's terms, like maybe via examples? I know you provide plenty in the book. So an example of an individual who encapsulates the problem that you're describing?
Yeah, so I start this book with an uncommon illness, which is called Huntington's disease. And I know most people's lives will not be touched by this illness. And I spoke to a lady called Valentina, who, when she was 28 and pregnant with her first child, discovered that Huntington's disease was in the family, and therefore she had a 50-50 chance of ultimately developing Huntington's disease. Now, what that did to her was it devastated her health, because it focused her on her body in a very unnatural way. She was aware of the types of symptoms you can get from Huntington's disease, like changes in mood, loss of coordination. And because she was aware of these things, she began looking out for them in herself. If she noticed ordinary things that could happen to anybody, like tripping over something or forgetting something, rather than dismissing them as you would when you're healthy, because she was at risk of disease, they really entered her her anxious attention, and so they became more obvious, and she paid more attention to them, and then they got worse. So that over the course of 20 years, she became gradually disabled by the fear of developing Huntington's disease. Now, I'm very happy to say for this incredible lady that, as it turned out, she didn't have Huntington's disease. But I tell the story because this is the effect of labeling on a person. So if you tell somebody that they have borderline hypertension, for example, or prediabetes, or that they have very mild autism or mild ADHD or depression, you change their entire relationship with their body, and you focus them on the things they cannot do, and that risks disabling a person.
Is this a lonely furrow that you're ploughing? I mean,
It does not feel that to me, because I'm not raising concerns that haven't been raised many, many times within medicine. So the issue of overdiagnosis is discussed in medical circles all the time. We've been discussing overdiagnosis of cancer in medical journals for decades.
How can you overdiagnose cancer? Surely it's either there or it isn't.
Yeah, if only it was. Well, that is the assumption on which many of these
I'm the layman.
These are the assumptions on which, medical people have assumed this, which is why it's come about. So the idea is you do mammography, for example, just to choose one type of cancer, breast cancer, and if you find any abnormal cells, you've detected an early cancer, you treat those and you prevent long-term cancer. What we didn't really realise until we actually started doing that is that lots and lots of people have slightly abnormal cells in their breasts that do not progress into life-threatening cancer. But because we are now looking for abnormalities, we find them, and then we don't yet have the ability to say which of these will turn into a life-threatening cancer and which won't. So we treat them all as life-threatening cancer. So the consequence of that is when you screen people for breast cancer, if 2,000 women are screened, you will save one life and potentially treat 10 women who didn't necessarily need to be treated in the first instance.
But it's a zero-sum game, though. If you didn't do that, you'd lose one life.
You would lose one life, but I think what we haven't thought about enough is what is the impact on the 10 people who didn't need the treatment.
It's quite a utilitarian thesis then.
Well, the difficulty is that we focus on the life that we've saved, but then we do this science and we say, okay, let's follow the mortality of this whole group and see if it's working as we think it should, then we should have an overall improvement in mortality for this group.
Deaths.
Well, no, you will have an improvement for cancer deaths. If you treat lots of people for cancer who didn't need to be treated, cancer deaths will look better. But if you look at all deaths, that's when you see the problem. You find that you haven't saved any lives, and that's because you've saved one life from cancer, but you have medicalized the life of somebody else and influenced their death or their health detrimentally through that treatment. So you are harming one person to save somebody else.
Which is why I said utilitarian, actually. It's a sort of comparison of benefits and negatives. And what you do incredibly powerfully is thread that needle of physical and mental, or physical and emotional, because you're describing people who become defined by their diagnosis to their own detriment. Whereas received wisdom is that a diagnosis is, in a sense, good news, because it means you're going to get the treatment that you've sought or need, and you challenge both of those. And also for people I speak to, particularly in the area of things like ADHD and autism, people feel quite liberated by a diagnosis because it helps them to understand a history of disassociation, or a history of not fitting in, or even a history of quite serious trouble.
I think you have to kind of make the distinction when you're talking about diagnosis between the benefit of diagnosis to the moderate to moderately severe group of people, whether it be whatever the diagnosis, whether it be a physical or mental health problem, and the people in the mild spectrum. In the mild spectrum, the impairment that's caused by a medical disorder such as, or any disorder, the impairment is quite small, and then you have a really powerful potential negative effect from labelling somebody as ill. So overdiagnosis doesn't mean a diagnosis is wrong. It just means that a diagnosis isn't necessarily...
It's not misdiagnosis.
Yeah, exactly. It just means that basically not having the diagnosis, you may well be better off. And that's because when you tell someone they have a medical problem, you take a 15 or 14-year-old child and you say, well, your social communication problems or your difficulties, your interests indicate you have a neurodevelopmental brain problem. Well, what happens to that child? They potentially focus on the things they can't do. They focus on the negative aspects of themselves. They have lower expectations for themselves. Teachers have lower expectations for them. Then the disorder becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You could have a child with difficulties, recognize them, and not give them the label, which would more likely help them to focus on the things they can do. So it's not that calling someone autistic at a mild level is wrong.
Is there anything controversial about using mildness in the context of autism?
Yes, I think it is, because mildness is undefinable. Mild, moderate and severe in these conditions is undefinable, and that's the difficulty. And I think this conversation would be easier if, as a medical community, we could define what impairment is, because impairment is the key to making these diagnoses. Medical diagnoses are made in order to support people who cannot function normally in the world. And in order to have a diagnosis of autism or ADHD, you are required to have impairment. But I think what impairment is a line that's drawn very faintly in the sand, unfortunately. I feel that impairment should mean that you can't do things that any ordinary person should be expected to be able to do. Like if you're a child, you can't go to school, or if you're a child, you can't sit long enough in the classroom in order to be taught, or as an adult, you can't go to the shops, or you can't do the work that you want to do. But unfortunately, I think this concept of impairment is being used very loosely to apply to things that, for example, it could now be potentially be given a medical label to someone who can't do public speaking. I mean, public speaking is something a lot of us can't do. I wouldn't necessarily consider that to be an impairment.
And we've got evidence of that. Someone getting a medical diagnosis because they're not good. They can't.
Well, it's now definable in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
And what would the diagnosis
be? Social anxiety. That would be part of a social anxiety disorder, yeah.
But I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? Because if you say social anxiety, everyone's going to nod along and say, well, that is social anxiety. It's the definition of social anxiety, standing up in a social situation and being subject to such high levels of anxiety that you can't function in the way that you're expected to.
Yeah.
But your problem is that they then add the word disorder to it.
Well, no. So these are all ubiquitous experiences. The difficulty is what qualifies as a medical disorder.
Yes.
And that's what we need to sort of really pin down. And that's, again, the same thing, really. To be a medical disorder, we've created concepts like autism, ADHD, anxiety and so forth to help a group of people who are significantly disabled and cannot function normally in the world. But what's happening out in the world is that these concepts are being distilled down to single traits, like I find this difficult or I find this difficult. But diagnosis should be defined by the level of impairment that you cannot do things that really any ordinary person should be expected to be able to do in the course of their daily life.
But isn't that why we use words like spectrum?
Yes, that is why we use words like spectrum. So autism exists on a spectrum, but where the difficulty lies is where...
So you want to chop off a bit of the spectrum and say, you might have that, but that's not actually what we're going to diagnose as autism anymore.
So what I don't want to do is say... So at the severe end of the spectrum, we all recognise what that is. At the mild end of the spectrum, we're having a great deal of difficulty drawing the line between what is normal and what is mild autism.
Yeah.
So I'm not suggesting that we chop off a bit of the spectrum and say, right,
that's not autism anymore.
Well, I want to say that's not autism anymore, but what I want to say alternative to that is not, there's nothing wrong with you, snap out of it, is not my attitude.
Sure.
My attitude is that this isn't autism any longer. However, it is a struggle, it is a difficulty.
Okay.
Perhaps there are people in the world who find the world difficult, who need support. But does it require a medical diagnosis to recognise that somebody needs support, help, or that the world needs to respond a little bit differently to some people? So I'm not advocating that people, there's nothing wrong with you, go away. I'm saying let's help people without medicalising them.
And I suppose in a sense, in conclusion, Suzanne, you'd need to undertake a sort of extraordinary poll, wouldn't you, of diagnosed people and ask, and it wouldn't even then be entirely reliable, but you would then have to ask them objectively, if you could, whether or not your diagnosis has improved or had a negative impact on your life.
I think it's incredibly...
You're working from the premise that the majority would say negative.
No, I'm working... So I think most people, when they're given a diagnosis, it does have a validating feeling and it does make people feel better. And I think it's very, very difficult to spot overdiagnosis at an individual level. Like if someone has been given, treatment for blood pressure and then they don't have a stroke or a heart attack, they might feel they've benefited from it, but who knows what was going to happen to them if they didn't. You have to look at this from a population level. And we've gone from a point of having 1 in 2,500 children having autism to 1 in 100 worldwide having autism, 1 in 36 in the US having autism, and 1 in 20 in Northern Ireland having autism. We've gone from a position of nobody getting special accommodations in school to 27% getting special accommodations. Now, the point of all of that was to recognise struggling people, to get them support, so improve mental health and progress in the world. But what do we have? We have higher rates of mental health problems in young adults than we've ever had. We've got higher university dropout rates than we've ever had. So let's face it, it's well-intentioned, but it doesn't seem to be working. So I'm asking people to stand back and say, listen, is labelling difference as medical working? It may on an individual level make people feel that give people some momentary relief. But what we seem to be doing is creating a population of young people with autism and older people with mental health problems, and there's a problem there.
I get it. It's fair to say you've divided the people listening, Suzanne, as you'd probably expect. I'll start with Jen, who says, I agree with this woman. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was 29, and from that point onwards, I didn't live as much life as I could have done because I was always conscious of my diagnosis. Looking back on things, I started having symptoms when I was 23, and I'm so glad the dots weren't joined because I lived my 20s to my fullest, which I wouldn't have done had I known. That's on the page that you're writing?
Yeah, I mean, basically, this comes back to sort of the early diagnosis of things like dementia. There's a lot of drive now to diagnose dementia earlier, and it can be diagnosed now 10 years before the
so it's an ignorance is bliss kind of, whatever we really boil it down.
Do you know what? One patient, when I was writing this book, one patient said to me, and she said, I'm glad I didn't get the diagnosis, because all that happens is instead of living longer, you live longer with a diagnosis. And
then in contrast, Madeline's been in touch, say, I understand where you are coming from, but the harm she describes can only be seen in hindsight after the disease that might have developed and been nipped in the bud has turned out not to develop at all. So ignoring or refusing a diagnosis might benefit one person and kill another. I think you acknowledged that earlier, but she also adds to another point. I regard withholding diagnoses of ADHD, ASD, etc. from a patient to be abusive.
I don't think anyone is suggesting any diagnosis is withheld. I think what I'm suggesting is that we reevaluate what we refer to as medical, but certainly never withhold a diagnosis.
I've got a feeling this book is going to excite an awful lot of conversation in a good and healthy way. The Age of Diagnosis by Suzanne O'Sullivan is out now, really, isn't it?
Yes,
in all good bookshops, mediocre bookshops, rubbish bookshops.
Hopefully all bookshops.
All the bookshops.
Yeah.
The time is 12:48. Thank you, Suzanne.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:51 is the time. I'm going to tell you a secret that's going to get me into a huge amount of trouble. In fact, I might even have to whisper it because this is so at odds with the prevailing winds of media. I don't listen to many podcasts. I know. I appear on loads. I present a few, but I don't. I listen to some. I won't tell you which ones they are. You can probably work it out for yourself. But I'm possibly, because I don't listen to as many as you do, when I stumble across one that is a thing of absolute beauty, I get overcome by a form of evangelical zeal, and I want everybody to know about it, which is why Alex Andreou is in the studio, the actor, broadcaster, and now creator of Podyssey, quite perfectly named podcast, revisiting classic Greek myths and uncovering the universal themes that they share with us across the millennia. That's quite a tall order, Alex.
That makes it sound quite worthy, doesn't it? When in reality, sort of stumbling around in the dark and eventually finding a pattern to things.
And where did the original idea come from? Where did it spring from? Because you've worked on political podcasts in the past. People will be familiar with you from that. But where did you get the idea? Where did it come? Where did the seed appear?
It was actually from a political podcast because, Boris Johnson loves to make parallels with the ancient world and allude to various ancient Greek figures. And I kept getting annoyed that people were making the wrong kinds of analogies about him. And I was like, there's this guy called Phaethon who was the son of the sun god and wanted to drive the sun chariot and kept thinking I'd be great at that. And then ended up stealing it and basically creating the deserts and the polar caps. That's how badly he drove it. And I thought that's the right reference. And from that conversation, I got loads of messages from people saying, can you just read, mythological tales to us, please?
Well, there are two things that drew me to this. The first is the content, and the second is your dulcet tones. You're a professional actor, but the love that you clearly feel for the subject matter cannot be faked.
No. Archaeology is kind of the family business.
Right.
I'm unusual for not having gone into it. My mother worked in a museum, my sister is an archaeologist, my godmother. So I've spent many summers of my youth on Delos, which is an island near Mykonos, on the various archaeological digs, or helping Mum catalogue various, tiny little coins that had symbols on them and what each symbol meant and all of that. So the bug was always there, just never pursued in any...
So you're an archaeologist of stories?
I guess so, yeah. Storytelling. I mean, I've been accused in the past of being slightly unfocused in my career, let's say. But this feels like every thread has come together in a slightly more meaningful way than being good at pub quizzes.
How do I describe why it is so special? So we'll start with, there's only one episode out so far, Echo and Narcissus, who, they are both words that everybody thinks they know the meaning of. And they are both the stars of stories that many people think they know. Probably not as many people who think they know the meaning of the words, think they know the stories of Echo and Narcissus. And you do you do many things in the podcast, but chiefly you establish the definitive version of the stories, and then you show the frankly extraordinary way in which these themes and ideas and iconic figures thread their way through subsequent history.
Yeah, and it's not genuinely not intentional. I go into the research and see what's there, and suddenly things begin to really pop up that repeat themselves again and again and again in film, in music, in paintings, and there is something fundamental to these tales that's to do with the human soul. It's to do with our flaws, our foibles, the way in which we are strong and the way in which we are weak, that are universal. And, next weekend is the story of Orpheus, which is all about the civilizing effect of music and how you can use music to defeat even death, as it were. And there is a reason why in every single culture there is music for lullabies and music for funeral laments, There's a reason why in every age, in every tribe, on every continent, people look to express themselves at moments of such high emotion. It's like words are not enough. Yes. You need song.
Timelessness, really, is what you stumble across. The reason why all of these themes are timeless. So in the one I've heard, in the Echo and Narcissus one, you can jump from Andrew Tate to there's all sorts of modern reference points. But what I think is unique in my experience is the detail you provide to describe those links. I worry about how long it takes you to do each one.
It takes quite a long time,
yes. And because it's a work of scholarship.
I wouldn't say that. Because I don't want to be.
No, I shouldn't say that either, because it makes it sound alienating. You can't turn it off.
And also prone to criticism, because it's not at an academic level. It's not a.
But you
PhD
speak to a lot
thesis.
of academics.
Yes. But it's basically someone telling stories. I choose my favorite version of the story and I tell it. And then there are themes in that, and I go across to my various experts and chat to them about, music and paintings and all of that, and patterns begin to emerge.
Which frequently surprise you.
Completely. When I first had the realization from looking at photos of those obsidian glasses that ancient Greeks used to use for scrying rituals, especially for young boys to become adults, part of the ritual would be that you would look at your reflection in this black glass mirror. And when I looked at those, they looked like smartphones. Yes. It was impossible not to make the connection.
I love it. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Do you know what else is coming up apart from Orpheus?
Cassandra is the one next week, which is possibly my favourite episode so far.
I have a lot of time for Cassandra, the person who's right about everything but never believed. Yeah, I don't know why that. So can't put that.
It's because you know me.
That'll be it. Yeah, that'll be it. Alexandre, thank you. People trying to remember where they've heard your voices. Jamie's been in touch to say, "Oh God, what now?" Used to be Romaniacs. Now it's Quiet Riot, where you strut your political stuff.
That's right.
And it's on Podyssey that you indulge your lifelong preparation for becoming an archaeologist of stories. Thank you, Alex. Eferistopoli. It is coming up to 1 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you missed any of today's show, you can catch up, of course, and rewind and even listen to live radio by simply downloading Global Player. And listen to a range. I'm doing this from memory now, can you tell?
Impressive.
Could you tell?
Not really.
How many times have I read this out over the last 2 years?
I'm not sure
months?
I could do it.
As well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty, the Cassandra of the airwaves, is with you now.
James O'Brien on LBC.